you can like commit a verbal threat. You can say, I'm going to fucking kill you.
Yeah.
And then that is.
Yeah, but even that statement itself, like I looked into the laws that talked about threats and stuff. Like it has to be a specific threat and very specific, and they have to have the means to be able to carry it out before you can be charged with that as
so
a
crime.
if
I pull out a knife and say I'm going to fucking stab you to death,
that could be that's a verbal threat that you could be charged with. But just saying I'm going to fucking kill you.
By the way, I just want to make it clear.
I'm not worried.
I felt very weird making eye contact and saying those words. So
I'm not worried.
It was for me. It was for me.
I got you. I appreciate that. I can sleep a little bit better.
Please don't charge me with a hate crime.
Yeah.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this and totally redeem yourself.
Yo, what's up, internet? Welcome back to another episode of Three Averagely Intelligent Dudes discussing dangerous ideas. Today we got quite a few dangerous ideas on the topic. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about what happened to these 6 Asian women, and it was 2 white males or
two
women?
white women
Two
in
white
the
women.
Atlanta spa shootings.
The Atlanta spa shootings. We're going to talk a little bit about that and branch that conversation off into some ideas. And then we're talk about the Derek Chauvin case is coming up into trial right now, and they're doing jury selection right now. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. I hope you stay tuned for the whole thing.
Yeah, we're going to touch on hate speech, hate crimes. We're going to touch on the judicial system. It's going to be a wide-ranging episode.
Let's get right into it.
In the past 2 years, there's been lots of violent rhetoric. You know, people point to Trump and say he's, causing a lot of divisive things within our society. And this has kind of culminated recently with an attack on what is claimed to be an attack on Asian Americans in Atlanta. A young man decided to go on a shooting spree that left 8 people dead, 1 more wounded, 6 of which were Asian Americans.
Yeah.
The reason that we specifically are talking about this as a crime against Asian Americans is not because of the claims that this young man made. It is simply because the targeting of the spas and massage parlors leads you down the path to, is this a hate crime? If you take the man at face value, the man who committed these atrocities, he would claim that it was about a sex addiction. He said that it was his sex addiction was at odds with his religious beliefs, and that's what motivated him in this murder spree.
That's what he came out and said.
Yeah,
that's
to
what
like
he came out and
remove
said.
his temptation spots for his
and
sexual outlets.
And this brings up an interesting topic of, is this a hate crime? What constitutes a hate crime? Well, a hate crime is a prejudice-motivated crime that occurs when a perpetrator targets a victim because of their membership or perceived membership of a certain social group or race. This includes ethnicity, disability, language, nationality, physical appearance, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation. Now, these determining factors change from state to state. There is a federal hate crime statute that is, pretty broad, but there are also state level ones. So on the state level, some of them say, well, it can't be a hate crime if it's based on physical appearance. Like, say, this is somebody who had plastic surgery, and I hate people who get plastic surgery, so I'm going to murder them because I noticed they got plastic surgery. In some states, that would fly. You're killing them based on a perceived grouping of people who get surgical enhancement, transhumanism to some extent. So the hate crime laws themselves get real murky, so I don't want to spend too much time there. But I do want to talk about this specific instance because the FBI has come out and said this is not being investigated as a hate crime.
Oh, so they did finally say it, because the last thing I kept seeing was them saying nothing's off the table yet. We're investigating everything.
They're a little wishy-washy.
But I think there's a federal investigation and a state investigation.
Correct. So this is going to get very murky.
Yeah.
But you cannot say that... You can't deny the evidence of 6 out of the 8 people dead were Asian women. That
Asian-owned businesses too.
Asian-owned businesses were attacked. So that seems very concentrated against Asian Americans. Now, if that is the case, then this is the worst mass shooting committed against the Asian American community in America. Now,
that's not true. I just per what I'm about to
mass shooting.
No, yeah, that's not true. Maybe shooting.
Mass shooting.
But I would say mass killing, I'm going to bring up a couple
stuff.
massacres.
Oh, yeah. And we literally put Asians in concentration camps as an American society.
It's been a big target on them for the last couple
But
years.
yes, like single mass shooting event. This is the one that the most dead of any single targeting of Asian people with a mass shooting. Now this we've seen a rise in these kind of mass shootings targeting specific people or hate crime mass shootings, because in October of 2018 this happened with the El Paso Walmart shooting, where it was the worst mass shooting committed against Latinos in America. Then you have the 2019 Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, which was the worst mass shooting against Jewish people in American history. So we're seeing mass shootings take this kind of almost ideological hate crime bent in recent years. Whereas before you could say, well, you know, there was a stabbing or a bombing that killed more Asian people than this mass shooting, but was it specifically a hate crime targeting Asians? You know what I'm saying?
And even with mass shootings, like the Las Vegas shooter and stuff, like he was just
Indiscriminate
firing
Indiscriminate
randomly
firing,
into a
yeah.
crowd, you know. And so like even
school
if
shootings tend to be
even if
indiscriminate.
it's like, oh well, more black people happen to die in that
Yeah.
shooting, it's like, well, he wasn't really targeting black people. He was just randomly firing bullets into a crowd of people.
Same with the Dylan Ruth and targeting the black church, like that. Like in a lot of these, the El Paso shooting, he specifically said he was targeting Mexicans.
Yeah.
In the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, it's pretty obvious he was specifically targeting Jewish
You're not going to
people.
find many non-Jewish people at a synagogue.
Exactly. And with this, you walked into 3 different Asian massage parlors and killed 6 Asian women out of the 8 people you killed.
Yeah.
It kind of fits the pattern. You know what I'm saying? So with this rise in Asian American violence against Asian Americans, the question is raised, is this because of COVID? Is this because of the rhetoric around COVID-19, that it came from China? Is this people grouping Asians and Chinese people together? And the data would suggest that there is a rise against Asian Americans in these types of crimes, the majority of them being non-physical, the majority of them being verbal harassment and avoidance.
Vandalism. I've seen some like
vandalism.
things.
There's been some physical
But there's been some
assaults,
physical
though.
Oh,
assaults.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Like,
many
there's been
incidents.
quite- yeah.
I believe it was 9% of all of the assaults in 2019 that were deemed by the AAPI against Asian Americans, specifically like hate crimes. It was about 9% they said were like physical.
So we're running through a lot of different things. I want to get in on this.
Yeah, I was waiting for you guys to jump in.
Yeah, like, okay, look, because my thing is the Asian hate stuff is a thing, but then there's this killing, and I don't think that those two things are the same thing, right? Like, he obviously was targeting these Asian-owned businesses and obviously Asian people, but like he said, he already came out and said it didn't really have anything to do with Asians, you know? So I'm just like, I don't know. I think it's an extrapolation, kind of like when we were talking about with the Derek Chauvin case and like the intent of murder versus negligence, right? It's this kind of just intent that goes into this, where I haven't seen this linked to those other crimes in the same way. Now, I feel like it's getting lumped there because we're just seeing a lot of
Anti-Asian hate.
and assaults and things going towards Asians, and so a lot of people are like, see again, you know, another one. But it doesn't seem to be the same case. Now, I'm not trying to be whatever with this, but like, are there other massage parlors? You know what I mean? Like, I have never seen that many white owned. Like, I mean, obviously there's brothels and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But a lot of times this tends to be an Asian kind of business.
He was
you know
a
what I mean?
regular
Yeah.
of these
Yeah.
particular parlors.
Has
These
that
material
been
products.
that's been confirmed
And
now?
that
Because
he's
that's
been
my
to them.
thing. That's
He
my
has
thing
been
is
to
that
them.
I've reserved judgment on whether or not to consider this as being a hate crime against Asians or whether it being what this man stated it was, which was a
Hate crime against
a-
sex workers.
Right. Well, yes.
Which is the same
and
thing.
It's,
Same thing,
Yeah,
essentially.
basically. It's still a hate crime. But I think that I reserve that because it's like, okay, if he frequented these businesses and we can prove that he was a customer or like frequently went to these places, then I think that the Asian hate crime thing is less a part of it because it's when you do crimes of passion and stuff like this, if that's how, I don't know exactly what the definition of that, but like he became very angry at this outlet for his sexual addiction. And if these were the places where he went to engage in that outlet, then it's not surprising to me that he would go to those same places that he would go to do that, to kill the people, to get rid of that temptation.
Yeah.
Now, if he just randomly went to whatever spas or picked out randomly spas that happened to be Asian, then I think that plays into it more because like you said, it's not like they're all massage parlors are Asian or anything like that. So like the fact that all of them were Asian and that he drove, like 2 of them were right across the street from each other. So that might just be based on convenience. But then he drove many, many miles out to the suburbs.
Past other massage parlors.
Past massage parlors that may or may not. I don't know. I've never been to Atlanta, and so I don't know the area or anything like that. But he could have driven past very many other places where these sexual outlets could be happening, and he ignored those to go all the way to this other one way out the way. And so it's like, okay, now if that's another place that he had frequented, I think that leads more toward the violence against sex worker thing. But also, it's not clear whether or not, like right now, the mayor, I watched this whole, like, kind of, I guess it was like a press briefing or whatever, where the mayor and the head of the county's sheriff's department and an FBI guy who was heading up the FBI investigation, like they all came out and gave statements and answered some questions. And they said that at this moment, it is like the mayor of Atlanta said that they are unaware of any reports that there is illegal activity happening at these massage parlors. So even just lumping them in with sex workers, I'm like, we don't know enough about this to say that these people were sex workers. So if we find out that they weren't sex workers and that he just went to Asian massage parlors and murdered them and said that it was because it was for a sexual addiction
or black or
then
any
I'm like,
other,
okay, the Asian thing plays in more. But if it's proven that they are sex workers and that he did go there and engage in these sexual conduct activities and then chose those specific places because they were the ones that were being his outlet as he claimed it to be, then I think that it plays in less. And my big point with it is just that everybody took the stance that it was a hate crime against Asians literally the night that it happened. Like I saw headlines from multiple different outlets saying this is an Asian hate crime against, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, we don't know anything about this yet. Like, how do we know that this was like, at the time, we didn't even know who it was. So it's like, if it came out that it was an Asian man that did it, are we still saying it was an Asian hate crime?
I saw a lot of people, not in the media headlines, but a lot of people on social media criticizing the media for not calling it an Asian hate crime right off the get.
Yeah, because of the evidence of it, all of the evidence kind of came out at once that it was like, this is the suspect. Yeah. He's a white guy. Here's the 3 massage parlors he hit. They're all Asian. Yeah. Six out of the 8 people murdered were Asian. So just with those facts alone, most people would, I would assume, jump to that conclusion.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's the problem, is jumping to conclusions.
I agree.
Especially when we're already charged up against Asian hate, right? Like
that was. I'm not surprised
at thing too. We were already in this predisposition of like, there's a lot of Asian hate crimes going on out here, and then for this to happen, you automatically kind of associate the two.
Right.
But
your brain's looking for patterns.
Yeah, right. But it's just, it seems coincidental. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, it also happened within a very close proximity to a very popular CBS News report of, inside the rising Asian American violence in America. And it had all the Asian correspondents. They talked about every one of the cases where people were attacked on the streets, and this happened very close to that. So it's like when you put that into the public realm, the public sphere, and put that into their mind, and then they see 6 out of 8 dead Asian women, I would say it's reasonable for them to jump to that conclusion.
Yeah, it's a tragedy nonetheless. I don't care how we
anytime anybody's killed like this,
dude
it's
just
horrible.
ran up. He bought the gun that day, I guess they said, and then that's what I'd heard, that he purchased it that day legally, and then just ran up in there. And then, like I said, from the quotes that he was saying, it was because he was struggling with his sexual addiction. I read some articles about his past. Like, I guess he had been to rehab for this in the past and stuff, and had just been recently kicked out of his home because he couldn't stop like masturbating and stuff. He had like a porn addiction.
Deeply religious and part of a deeply religious family, so that plays that would explain why he would get kicked out for masturbating.
Right.
Which seems kind of wild to a lot of just. I feel like a lot of people masturbate, so it's like, why would you get kicked out?
But supposedly this dude was like masturbating like hours on end.
And so like
hours on end, like
it's
on porn.
Based off of the evidence I've seen, it seems clear that this man had some sort of problem with his sexuality, and urges that he had and stuff like that, like maybe porn addictions or whatever. But that doesn't seem to be false. Now that doesn't mean that he didn't kill these people because he hates Asians, but I think that seems to be something that there's enough evidence at this point to say like, it looks like this guy had some problems with his sexual.
Even if he was just fetishizing them.
Yeah,
That's
even
what
if
I
it
was saying
just,
too. Maybe like that's his flavor.
Yeah, even if that's just his preference.
Yeah.
Like you are still targeting them based on their.
No,
religion.
yeah, if that happens,
true.
if it comes out that like we pull up his browser history and it's
And
all
it's all
Asian sex
porn,
stuff, then I'd be like, okay, well this guy's got something with sex and he's got something with Asians, and so they both play.
There's also an eyewitness report that I don't believe is corroborated by anybody else.
Yeah, I saw this.
Where it is claimed that he said the words, "I will kill all Asians." So that's difficult because it's one eyewitness
and it's very on the
Convenient.
nose.
Yeah, convenient.
I
Like,
will kill all Asians.
It just doesn't sound like something you'd yell
Yeah.
while you're committing, an atrocity like this. But who knows? Who knows? We don't have the facts on that one.
Yeah,
it's just something that it's
more
in the
information.
Wikipedia article and it links to some kind of an eyewitness said kind of BuzzFeed shit.
And so this is my only issue with this whole scenario is just that, and we'll kind of talk about it later in the second topic of today's show, but when you start having public opinion being swayed in such a very strong direction very quickly, it can influence the legal process. And I think that that's the only part that I'm worried about here, is that if the court of public opinion finds this man guilty of Asian hate crime, it's very hard for a judicial court of law to not find him guilty of hate crime. Like, it influences that process.
Well, I'll also add that, hate crime is in Atlanta. Like you said, there are different laws everywhere. But, by the way, just before I get to this, what do you think the penalty for hate crime is? Have you looked it up? Do you know?
Mm-mm.
If it's a hate crime versus a murder? Because this is a big deal to everybody.
It's definitely an added
2 years.
That's it.
It's an added 2 years.
It's an additional 2 years
minimum. I don't know what the maximum is, but it's a minimum added 2 years and some other thing. But it's very minuscule, the punishment, and I can look it up to get the.
It's also incredibly hard to prove. That's one of the points
but
about
I
this.
think just because like we talk about too with it signals, it's like a virtual, you know what I mean? Like, hey, like this is happening out here. Like it's like more of an acknowledgement thing, I feel like. But I just wanted to make that clear to everybody, because I see everybody trying to push this as like this needs to be a hate crime, and I'm like, it's not really going to change the outcome of this. It's not like murders 10 years and then a hate crime's life or something.
Yeah,
like
I've
that.
always thought that it was like a tiered thing, because like I know like a hate crime can be like an assault too.
Yeah.
Like if you assault somebody for a hate crime, but that's my thing, is like that's actually more than I would have guessed. Like I wasn't sure until you asked, but that's more than I would have guessed if it's like any hate crime gets a minimum of 2 years of extra time.
Because that could be verbal or something.
Because you could have like a verbal hate crime, and so it's like if you get charged with a misdemeanor verbal assault or something, like misdemeanor assault where you were going to do 6 months, and then they charge you with a hate crime on top of it, and all of a sudden you're doing 2 years in 6 months.
Yeah.
Like that seems... And like you said, the only reason that I feel like maybe that's not so bad is because it is extremely difficult to prove that it's a hate crime.
Yeah, and I didn't think about that too, that it applies to any hate crime, not just a murder.
Like any crime could be a hate crime. Like if you only steal from Asian people, is that like an Asian hate crime?
That's
like,
and
I was just expecting it because of how much people were pushing it. I thought it was going to be astronomical.
There was also, we're going to show the different instances of some of these crimes against Asian people that have risen in the past year since COVID.
This surveillance footage shows a 71-year-old Asian grandmother violently shoved to the ground, her purse stolen. Just one of several attacks in California's Bay Area recently. A 91-year-old man pushed in Oakland's Chinatown, one of 3 attacks that day. 84-year-old Thai American Visha Ratanapakdi knocked over while out for a walk. He died a few days later from his injuries. Asian American leaders say these attacks are a trend, not isolated incidents. Asian Americans Advancing Justice has cited at least 3,000 anti-Asian incidents since last February. In New York City, there was an 867% increase in Asian hate crime victims in 2020 compared to the year before.
And in one of those cases, you can see where it's like a verbal assault by a very well-off white man who just got finished eating a dinner. He's putting his jacket on. They identify him as some sort of tech guy in the tech industry, and he, lashes out, calling this, well, you damn Asian person, or something along those lines. We'll show it in a clip.
Say that again. Oh, now you're shy?
Michael Lofthouse gave the family the finger, then said,
Trump's gonna you need to leave now.
You need to leave.
Oh, you do not talk to
No,
our
you
guests
need
like
to
that.
leave.
What's wrong
You
with
need to
you?
leave.
Asian piece of
Oh my God.
He was full of hate and anger. It's sad that there's still people that are like that in this world, let alone in this country.
A Lucia employee quickly stepped in.
You do not talk to our guests like that. Get out now.
Who are these?
They are valued guests.
Oh, are they?
Yes.
Yeah, they're
Get out
valued
of here.
guests.
Yeah.
I admire her for that.
In an emailed statement, the vice president and general manager at Bernardus Lodge and Spa in part writes, quote, "We are proud of our staff at Lucia in keeping with Bernardus Lodge's core values." Michael Lofthouse also issued a statement writing, quote, "My behavior in the video is appalling. This was clearly a moment where I lost control and made incredibly hurtful and divisive comments. I would like to deeply apologize to the Chan family. I can only imagine the stress and pain they feel. I was taught to respect people of all races, and I will take the time to reflect on my actions and work to better understand the inequality that so many of those around me face every day."
But it's like the idea that could be, that's assault. You know, you're assaulting them based on their race. If that's deemed a hate crime, is that a minimum 2-year sentence? Mm-hmm. How do we feel about that? Do you think that freedom of speech is then being infringed upon?
So we should definitely get to that, like about the different, because like is speech an assault?
That was going to be my first.
Yeah, I want to
like,
get to
I
that.
think it's a reach
I wanna
to call
make that
him
a
yelling at
whole
this man
point.
an assault.
I want to make that a whole point. But like you said, if you pickpocket somebody or beat somebody up and it is just common assault, but then it becomes a hate crime, that actually does up the statute a little bit. But in this particular case, unless they charge him each individually as hate crimes, you know.
Yeah,
that could
I guess
add
that's
up
true. Like if
quickly
he gets
to,
charged with individual counts of hate crime on yeah, that's weird too. Like, can you get, like, would he have 8 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated assault, because I've seen that the person who was wounded is aggravated assault, and then 6 counts of hate crime, because the other 2 people that were murdered were white women that worked at these massage parlors. And so it's like, is that how they would charge him? Like 6 counts of hate crime on top of the 8 counts of murder and aggravated assault?
That's really tricky. But the point that I was trying to make originally is that sex, right, and sexual orientation are also covered under Georgia's hate crime laws. So now but they also say gender. So I don't know what sex means. I don't know what sex is compared to gender, you know, so I don't know. But
yeah, that's strange.
Right. So I don't know, but
I'm trying to cover all their bases.
Really, essentially, I think
guess,
that even if he's just targeting these people because they're sex workers, I think that still
weren't they all women? I mean, all the people that were killed were women. Was the person that was injured a woman?
No, it was a Latino male handyman.
Okay.
So, but then also,
the fact that he only wounded that person, like, can you say that it's a hate crime against women?
Well, but it seems like it does seem a little indiscriminatory, right? Like it seems like it was more about going and murking everybody up in this spa than it was about picking out the Asians in the spa. You know what I mean? I don't know that.
Yeah, and if you happen to just go to Asian spas, it's likely that you'll find mostly Asian people there. And mostly women, because I don't know, like you said, he's a handyman there, so it's not like at these like lower quality.
Actually, maybe one of the guys shot.
I mean, the places didn't look very.
I'm trying to remember if it was a guy and his wife getting a couples massage is what it might have been.
Oh.
But I will say this about the sex worker thing. There are numerous websites that you can go on that tell you if these massage parlors are willing to give you the Jimmy Johns. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So on every one of those sites where any of these 3 places had like profiles or people talking about them, every one of those sites has said you can get a rub and tug.
Well, I definitely, like, again, my personal opinion based off of what I saw from these places, I would have assumed that they were.
That was my assumption.
But that's my thing, is that I didn't jump to the conclusion and say definitively that they were, because I was like, I don't know, that they look like they might be, but I'm not going to sit here and say that they are definitively, because that's not the same as saying it looks like one.
It's also, this is pushing us and our society into this idea of like, we have open air prostitution happening all over America. Yeah. We also have gambling on a very dangerous level in states where there's no gambling. You know, in North Carolina, it's the fish game. The fish where you play the arcade fish tables.
They got those in Texas and a lot of places.
And those are like literally North Carolina is littered with these businesses that have these very strange names, like 28115 LTD period.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, what is that? Oh, that's a gaming center. That's
Yeah,
where
yeah.
people go play a fish game and bet real money.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is legalized gambling in a very dangerous, very seedy neighborhood that is not regulated properly.
That's why a lot of people say we need to just make this stuff legal, like
Prostitution,
sex,
drugs,
all this
gambling.
stuff, so that way we can see it and we can monitor it, we can
Right.
regulate it instead of it happening in these
Any of
places
those
where
things-
you can't really protect them.
Any of those things happening in the black market is much worse than
It's
them
more dangerous.
happening in the white
Right?
market.
Yeah, it's 100% more dangerous.
It's just
than-
seen as morally outrageous to the largest voting bloc in America, which is
True.
evangelical
Yeah,
Christians.
true.
I was just
very true.
thinking, as I was saying that last statement, I wonder if they'll come for those phrases. Just as an aside, like black market and white market, like the black market being the criminal market and the
Yeah.
white market being like the
Or like
legitimate market.
black hole being this destructive force.
Yeah.
or,
Like I've seen a lot of
White
that going
knight
on. Like
being
it,
the
it hit
savior.
me as I said it, like
True.
the black market and then the white market being this like upstanding thing. I was like, man, that's one area where I feel like maybe we should think about the names of those
Yeah,
things.
it's very
Language
strange. I never
matters.
thought of
Language
that.
does matter.
Language
Language does matter.
He's
I am
the proponent
I'm
of that.
huge about that. Like the words that you use to describe things will change the way that you think about them and the conclusions that you will come to.
This
about
is
them.
crazy.
Yeah.
We gotta do a podcast about that. I never even thought about that in my
Well,
life.
we can't have urban jurors. We need those good rural jurors.
Yeah, right. That's
And so, but I think that I mean, are you guys ready to move into the free speech part of that discussion?
Sure,
Because I mean,
sure.
you made a great point, and it's like I don't think that anybody should be yelling at anyone for any sort of reason. Like I'm really trying. Like I grew up as a very irritable person and quick to like fly off the handle and shit like that. So it's like I've been trying to tone that down. Like yelling doesn't get you anywhere that's good. I've never seen it work out for the best and been like, that's the best way that event could have turned out.
No, it's a loss
by
of
yelling.
control.
Exactly. It's a loss of control. So like I'm not
That's usually what you
saying
see in those
I'm not sitting here saying like, oh yeah, everybody just go out and yell whatever epithets you want at whoever you want. But yelling at somebody being an assault, regardless of what they say, that's a huge reach to me. And this whole like I remember growing up like the whole sticks and stones thing. And I hear people when they say like, oh, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words will never hurt you. And it's like, no, it's me. Words can never hurt me. It's an internalized way of empowering yourself to not be hurt by words. Unfortunately, some people are hurt by words, but it's like you have to adopt that mindset on yourself. It's not something that can be imposed upon you. And I think that it is an infringement of free speech. Like if neo-Nazis can march through Skokie, Illinois and yell probably the most ridiculous shit about Jewish people in a neighborhood with the highest amount of Holocaust survivors in America, then yelling at somebody, whatever words you use, cannot be like just because there were more of them and they were doing it in a standardized way that they called a protest, that's somehow allowed. But yelling at a man in a restaurant is an
where I'm
assault.
at with it, though. That's where I'm at.
It's
with
like
it,
that doesn't
though.
make any sense.
It does make a little bit of sense in the sense of like if you're marching down the street yelling heinous racial slurs and stuff, you're not really targeting somebody, right? Because a lot of people
They're targeting Jewish people.
Right, but who were Jew? Like, you know what I mean? Like Jewish people. It's not like Jewish person. You know, like when people get into the subject of verbal assault, I just want to make sure we're categorizing right, because it's not just like me talking shit to somebody, right? A lot of times when you see these people, I'm gonna bring up an example. It's like they're in their face and they're intimidating them and they're screaming at them particularly and they're invading their space and stuff like that. It's not like they're just across the room like, fuck you, bitch, I don't really like you, as they're walking out the door, right? Or like you said, or marching down the street just chanting.
Kind of
out
like what they
into the
did
open.
to that woman at that restaurant. Like the Black Lives Matter people were all yelling at that woman.
Right.
And she was just trying
She's
to eat.
like, you know what I
she
mean?
was
She's-
literally having to lean back.
Right,
Like,
exactly. And so, like, imagine now the same people marching down the street, but they're just all crowded around one dude, and they're just like, yeah, you, no, wait, you know what I mean? Like, all
Where
up
do you
in
think
your
you're
shit.
going?
Yeah, you know, that's very scary, and it can feel like an assault. You know, you can feel like, especially in a place like America where we have a personal bubble, you know what I mean? And like you have your personal space and it's not to be like violated. When you get people all up in your shit and they're essentially intimidating you, I see where people call that an assault. You know what I mean?
I'm afraid of calling it a verbal assault. Like that would be more of like a physical assault. You're physically assaulting my personal space or whatever. And maybe we need to define what somebody's personal space is or some shit like
tough.
that. But as far as I'm concerned, calling that a verbal assault, even though what you use to defend it as an assault was something physical, that defeats the purpose of calling it verbal.
Well, we have the definition of verbal threat. You can like commit a verbal threat. You can say, I'm going to fucking kill you.
Yeah.
And then that is
Yeah, but even that statement itself, like I looked into the laws that talked about threats and stuff. Like it has to be a specific threat and very specific, and they have to have the means to be able to carry it out before you can be charged with that as
so
a crime.
if I pull out a knife and say I'm going to fucking stab you to death,
that could be that's a verbal threat that you could be charged with. But just saying I'm going to fucking kill you.
By the way, I want to make it clear.
I'm not worried.
I felt very weird making eye contact and saying those words.
So I'm not worried.
It was for me. It was for me.
I got you. I appreciate that. I can sleep a little bit better at night.
Please don't charge me with a hate crime.
Yeah, I think that but that's one of the big things. Like the ways in which you can be charged, like that's why libel and slander and defamation are very hard to charge and convict on as well, because like the freedom of speech is a very broad freedom. And like I also heard about it, like some people interpret it like as the freedom of speech for the speaker, but there is also a freedom of speech for the listener. And so like the idea, the example that I heard was that there was some woman who wasn't allowed into the country for legal reasons or whatever like that. And she gave a Zoom talk to a university here in America. And the university, I guess like some people at the university didn't want her to be able to give that speech because they were like, she's not even allowed in the country. Why would she be allowed to speak at this university? But there is a right for the people who want to listen to her to hear what she has to say. And so like that's the kind of generality that the First Amendment provides, is like it's a huge gray area, but that's why I think that it's so big and so gray. I think that because of the fact that you don't want to start saying, okay, if they get in your face and say it, it's a verbal assault. And then if they're only 2 feet away, then it's not. Because then how far can we push that? Like, well, maybe if the person claims that they felt threatened when you were across the street, then that is a verbal assault. And it's like, well, now we're starting to infringe on things that are less than, and that's why I say it's you shouldn't call that verbal assault. Like that's a physical assault. He was invading your physical space.
But that's not the right word either. You're not physically attacking them with anything. You're not using any like you're not touching them.
Well, I'm just saying based on the way that you defended it. I wouldn't call somebody getting in your face a physical assault either.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that assault has been committed until you put your hands on somebody.
I also want to make the point, we are kind of talking about hate crimes, but in the area of hate speech and verbal assault. What are the qualifying factors that make you black enough to where if I assault you and call you the N-word, it's not a hate crime?
Yeah.
What are the deciding factors? How much heritage do I have to have of a certain race before I'm allowed to use their slurs and use those slurs in the commission of an act of hate?
And it's not a hate speech.
And it's
not a hate
and it's
speech.
not
Even
hate
if you were obviously being hateful too, which is crazy.
Who was that guy that just got in trouble for? He's a basketball player for like the Miami Heat.
Oh,
I think.
yeah.
And he just got in trouble because he was like live streaming a video game and he
Used a
called
Jewish
somebody. We called him a kike bitch.
Yep.
Like I don't know if he called them a kike bitch, but he just kind of like yelled out like, "Oh, you kike bitch!" And it's like they fined him and stuff like that, and they were like, "Oh, that's like hate speech. Like you can't say that." And he was suspended for a short amount of time or whatever. But then I was like, don't you think that that's kind of like a double standard? Because I remember when Kevin Garnett used to play and he would be mic'd up and shit. Like you could literally hear him calling other black people the N-word over and over and over again.
It's
and
identity politics, man.
And it's so weird. It's like, well, how is it that some people can use these words and be convicted of crimes, but other people cannot use those words and so therefore cannot be convicted of those crimes?
That's the point.
Or can be using those words but not be convicted of crimes.
That's the whole point I'm making. If the guy who did it was I can't remember his name.
He's a backup.
Yeah, we'll put it up. But like, if he's non-Jewish and uses an anti-Semitic slur, what if he is Jewish? What if his grandmother's Jewish? What if he's ethnically a Jew, but he's not, he doesn't practice? Like, what are the parameters? Because when you start having to put parameters around who can and cannot say certain things, you're taking identity politics to a level where are we going to be issued Girl Scout badges of all the different things that we are tied to? Like
our intersectionality points.
Yeah. Is there going to be some sort of social point system for like who can and cannot be a victim?
And what about self-hating people? Like I've heard that term a lot recently. Like, oh, you're a self-hating black person. And it's like, so can a self-hating black person be charged with hate speech for calling another black person the N-word? Like, how does that play out? Like, how do you bring that into a court of law?
That's the whole point. Is we're not just mincing words. We're not just like playing around in the gray area. We're talking about laws. We're talking about people being charged and adding years to their sentence based on these things. Yeah. So it is something that we do have to go into these areas and define in some way.
If you're going to be charging them with crimes,
or just accept that freedom of speech is fucking freedom of speech.
So is hate speech it's a crime?
It has not ever in America been
no.
considered a crime. It's been knocked down by the Supreme Court multiple times.
Yeah, like they're very.
It's just something that socially is not
socially,
acceptable.
And I can agree with the idea that over time, as a culture, we will evolve out of saying things because we no longer find them acceptable.
I already quit. I won't say the N-word anymore. I just put it as one of my stories. I won't say it anymore until everybody can say it. You know,
exactly.
To me, it seems segregative in a way. Like, and if it's like,
it's an interesting reason. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, well, you know, like I've always said that. You know what I mean? Like, you can't say you don't want to be segregated, but then do things that segregate you, and in this sense, like use this word that you know, and then get mad at other people who it just, to me, it's so hypocritical and all this. And I used to fall a victim to this, so I'm not like, you know, I used to do this, you know what I mean? But to me, I had to take a stand on that, and I had to say, okay, look, well, you know, until everybody can say it, then I'm just gonna go ahead and willingly withdraw from using it because it doesn't make any sense to me, you know, like except for all the reasons that we're talking about.
And it is a powerful slur. You know, I got into a bit of a discussion with someone. I won't name names, but they said there was a restaurant, and the restaurant's name was Crackers. And this person made the comment, and they're a boomer. They made the comment, well, how come we can have a restaurant named Crackers, but not a restaurant named Blur? You know, like, blur, you know what I'm saying? Like, she just said the word. And I was like, whoa, okay. Those are two completely different things, because one of them was used to subjugate people and has been a hateful term for a long fucking time against a group of people that we enslaved as a nation. The other one is a joke term from the Jeffersons. Like, you can't hold those two together.
But I still think you can, though. I just think that, like, maybe the restaurant was just calling itself Crackers because it was like a play on the food.
It was playing up on the redneck image.
So, okay. Well, then, I mean, but I think that's still the same. You know what I mean?
It's like calling a restaurant Guido's. Like, some words have more weight than others.
Well, and I think that, like, well, just on the sense, like, you were saying that they're playing up the redneck, you know, kind of thing. Like, that's our theme. It's like the redneck thing. It's like, so then you could have a restaurant called the N-word if it was owned by black people and it was all about, like, hip-hop theme.
Another great point. Another great point. Is that acceptable? Like, we have not figured this shit out.
I heard it in a Juice WRLD our lyric the other day, and he dropped the ER, like a hard R in that thing, and I was just like, everybody's cool with this? Like, I was like, this feels weird to me. I don't care if he's black or not. Like, it was just like
PewDiePie dropped that hard R, and his last video from 3 days ago still got 3 million views.
Yeah. Facts. So
yeah, well, PewDiePie doesn't. The rules don't apply to him. So
I mean, when you got 75 million subscribers,
I mean, he just keep on a trucking.
Million. He has over 100 million.
Yeah, he just keep on a trucking.
You can kind of ping those things right off you. But I think, like you said, it's obviously a gray area as long as it's not a crime. Like, for a second, I thought we were saying hate speech was like a crime. Like, you go to jail for saying some shit. And I was like, okay, well, now you're right. Like, if we're charging people criminal things for this very gray, murky thing. Yeah. But, hey, look, if the NBA don't fuck with it and they want to fine you, so be it.
Yeah,
as long as they got it in their rules of conduct.
I thought that it was
if everybody wants to come at you and say you're a trash for that, then they got the right to call you trash for that.
My only issue with that situation was just that I felt like there was a double standard, because you know that there be black players out there calling other players the N-word.
That's true.
And I don't hear about any of them getting fined. And that's while they're doing things that the NBA pays them to do.
True.
That's while they're physically in action for the NBA. This man was on a live stream video game thing on his personal channel. Now, I also believe that if, like, I think it's unfair that you're going to fine him but not other players for doing the exact same thing. But I also thought, like, the fine that they gave him was pretty light. It was like $50,000. And I was like, the dude makes $10 million a year. Like, that's a light fine. And that's the problem with these fines. Like, we talked about it when we did the electrical grid conversation. And they were like, it's $1 million fine. And I was like, this is a multi-billion-dollar company. That doesn't mean anything to them.
Peanuts.
Yeah, it's like nothing.
Fucking
peanuts. I mean, it's like,
that's like if you make $50,000 a year and somebody said, we're going to fine you 25 cents.
Yeah, it's a light smattering.
It's like, well, fuck, I'll do that every single day.
Dude, like a speeding ticket, you know, it's like $250. It's not like it's gonna bankrupt you, but you don't like to pay it though. You still be like, fuck, man, $250, like that was my whatever money, you know.
I feel
so
you.
It's a smack.
It's
you know?
It
I'd be
depends,
more
like,
mad
it's
if it was
proportional.
stouter. If they were
Yeah,
like $500,000 for
it's
saying,
proportional
like,
though, because it's like someone. You're right. Some people don't like that, but Marshawn Lynch, he don't got no problem paying
he
those
racked
fines.
them up.
He racked them fines up, and he still doesn't mind. And
Hey,
so it's like some people
different value in your money, you know.
Yeah, some people
would
will be
rather-
able to just be like, "Oh, you're only gonna fine me
principle of the
that
matter.
much," and I was just using that to point out
Like,
I
I
think
would speed.
fines.
I
Yeah.
can afford to speed.
If you can afford to
tickets.
speed, then you would.
Yeah.
And so it's like at that point, I feel like fines are just not a very good crackdown on those
Shout
things.
out to Julian Edelman. When this case happened,
For real.
Julian Edelman wrote on Instagram an open letter to, I think it was Miles something. I don't remember the guy's name. But he wrote an open letter to him stating like, hey, I'm Jewish. I'd love to have you over my house for Shabbat or something.
Yeah, I can tell you about what this is.
And I can explain to you because it's ignorance. It's not. He did not believe this man was saying it out of hate. He thought this man was saying it out of ignorance.
He couldn't have even known that the person that he was playing against, if he was playing against anybody, was Jewish.
He was using an exclamatory racial slur.
Yeah.
He
just knew that it was a bad term.
Like, he wasn't trying to proliferate hate, and that's the thing I was thinking about with hate speech. It's not necessarily just about the word, because like I said, black people will use that word in an endearing way. You know, I'll walk around and be like, what's up, fucker? You know what I mean? And it's not hate.
It's not negative.
Like, it's a love.
There's
you know what I mean?
context in there.
There's context. So I don't think it's always just the word. It's about whether or not that intent
How you
is
use
to
it.
hate. You know, I wanted to make the point too. I know I've just been on this kick about this whole thing, but now that we're opening up my ability to talk about this, like, I just feel so bad inside every time I watch these little white girls on TikTok and they're like singing their song or doing their dance and they're like, bloody, 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 scat it up, da da da. I'm just like,
I'm gonna make a do up.
Yeah, and I'm just like, see, y'all don't got no problem selling them the music with the words in it, you know, making your dollars. But God forbid that little girl slip up. You know what I mean? God forbid that girl slip up and let it slide. And it's like everybody's like, oh my God, I can't. It's like, we know y'all all saying it in your head.
Yeah,
we know you saying it in your head when you alone and driving around in your car. We all know you out there just.
Some of y'all say it out loud.
So it's just like,
if anybody's ever watched all of our
it's clown
episodes,
talk.
if anybody's ever watched all of our episodes, they will know that we've discussed this idea of, can I sing the N-word in private, and is that racist? Because that's something me as a white man or as a Latino person, whatever you want to define me as, I don't give a fuck what badge you put on me. I don't say it because it's a bad word to me.
Yeah.
But sometimes I be singing that Kanye song, and I want to do the song justice.
That's the lyric.
Kanye put it there.
Kanye
wanted
wrote
it
that
in that
word.
song.
A black man
He
wrote
wanted
this
it
song,
there.
so I mean, I feel like I should be allowed to
doing
sing
a
it.
disservice to this man.
The man's art, like, you know what I mean? Like, let you take out all the other lyrics. You know what I mean? It's like,
Go read
what?
Shakespeare and never say thou.
Yeah,
you know,
it's
like
just wild.
it's part of the art.
It's an interesting double standard that happens in our society, and I think that's where, you know, God, we could all just use a little bit of nuance. Like I said, you know when somebody's trying to be hateful towards you. You know it.
You can tell.
Feel it. You can see it. Like, you know, just real quick, I wanted to bring up this example of somebody who's actually, quote unquote, verbally assaulting somebody.
Everyone's talking about.
Every person I listen to, he spoke it, she's speaking it, is America.
He's unhinged, all because he encountered some people at a lunch spot speaking Spanish.
They were running a place in Midtown Manhattan, the staff should be speaking English, not Spanish.
The manager tries to escort him out of the restaurant, but the guy just won't stop.
And my guess is, they're not documented. So my next call is to ICE to have each one of them kicked out of my country.
The video of the rant went viral in a flash, and very soon the angry customer was identified as a 42-year-old New York lawyer whose office is located across the street from the restaurant. It turns out this incident is not the first time he's been caught on camera in an angry and unprovoked confrontation. His name is Aaron Schlossberg, and he's been videotaped in the past, turning his wrath on total strangers.
You're a moron for before.
Look what we found. Video posted on social media in 2016 of yet another bizarre run-in with Schlossberg.
I'm gonna call the police. You don't run into people. I'm a citizen here. You're not. You're an ugly foreigner. So
I've never seen anyone act like this in real life.
Willie Morris, who was taking a stroll with his girlfriend, couldn't believe what happened.
Cringe. So, dude, they got on this dude because, hey, you can't go to jail for this shit, but let the internet get a hold of you, dog.
Oh, yeah.
They started a GoFundMe to send the mariachi band. The mariachi band sat outside his apartment playing with microphones.
Hey,
shit, bro.
you motherfuckers got way too much time and money on your hands.
I'm not a support of trolling, but god damn, that's a delicious troll.
I like trolling.
So funny.
I think it's funny.
But like, dude, then the media, like, they got the video of him. He's trying to run with his like umbrella, and they're all like, "Why'd you say all that shit?" He's like,
Yeah,
dude,
see,
they'll come
and
after
all
you.
of that I think is like fair game. Fair game. You get to spend your money on whatever you want to spend it on. You get to say about this man whatever you want to say about him because he gets the same. He gets the same freedom, and so that's like hey, can't put him in jail for it because we got the First Amendment.
Yeah.
But after that, as long as you don't beat the shit out of him or whatever, like there shouldn't be any sort of like physical repercussions for it. But like if you want to yell at him back,
Also,
be my guest.
there is the protected and unprotected free speech. So just as just a small caveat there, like libel is not protected. You know, where you lie about people in the public space and print falsities about them. You know,
but that's mostly pointed towards media and stuff. Correct?
Yes, but it can also be like I could be the one doing it.
Like
myself.
if I tweet just nasty rumors.
Well,
about
but there's
you,
also yelling fire in a crowded movie theater
Sure.
and causing things like that. Like there are exceptions and there are unprotected. There is unprotected speech.
There's unprotected speech. But I think that those, like you said, they're very clearly defined.
Yes.
And they're and that's the problem is that
you can't.
This
clearly
other
define
stuff
hate
is like
speech.
barely unclearly defined.
It's really tough.
And that's the same thing that to kind of tie this back into the broader point. Like I kind of feel the same way about hate crimes. It's like they're not really clearly defined as far as I'm concerned.
Unless they are. Like you said, sometimes they are, though. Sometimes people come out straight up and they say, look, I'm killing all these Nazi or, whatever, Jewish
I want to kill all the cops.
Yeah,
or
I hate you because you're this and you need to die. They sometimes write manifestos, things like that. Sometimes it can be very clear.
But that's not even defined. But that's clearly defined from the perpetrator. What we were just talking about, like there are certain things in the law of the country that are clearly defined as unprotected speech. Whereas the only way that you could say that this, like with the situation that happened in Atlanta, we're basing it whether or not it's a hate crime mostly from what I've seen right now on his statement. And that's what you just use, like, we're killing Latinos. Okay, well, then it's a hate crime. But if he doesn't say that we're killing Latinos, then how do you prove that he was trying to do that?
And that's why I don't think that this is a hate crime. You know what I mean? Like, that's why I don't think that this particular incident was a hate crime against Asians.
Yeah.
But now I will, and I would love to segue to the fact that actual hate crimes against Asians is happening, though. And that is something that is on the rise in our society. Now, whether this incident we're going to use it to lend a look at that, then that's great, because there has been a lot of protesting, a lot of rallies, a lot of things that have sparked up about this, because a lot of people are saying, like, look, this is happening to Asians on a grand scale. And you alluded to it earlier, a lot of people are pointing towards the fact that when the coronavirus came about, that a lot of Republican leaders, Trump specifically, started blaming China for the virus, right? Now,
I will say that I saw an entire clip. It was like 4 minutes long of, and I'm not prescribing any sort of ideology to the people at CNN, but of CNN anchors and newsmen and all kinds of people at that organization calling it the China virus, the Wuhan virus.
Yeah. Tying coronavirus to China and Chinese people isn't just a racist dog whistle. It's a whole racist orchestra. It's a mighty, mighty racist bass tone.
But wasn't the Zika virus named after a forest in Uganda? And wasn't the Ebola virus named after a river in the Democratic Republic of the Congo? But that dastardly Mitch McConnell and other Republicans refer to the virus as the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus, and they are racist?
This is all happening at a time that we're starting to see a message shift here, because you're starting to hear the Republicans, especially Trump calling it the Wuhan or the Chinese coronavirus. They're looking for someone to blame.
Concern is growing this morning over an outbreak of a new SARS-like virus in China. At least 6 people have died from the Wuhan coronavirus. The Wuhan coronavirus. The Wuhan coronavirus.
The 34-year-old ophthalmologist diagnosed Saturday with the Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan virus.
The Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus. What more can you tell us about the similarities or differences between SARS and the Wuhan coronavirus?
The Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus in China.
The Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus. And the Wuhan coronavirus.
Wuhan coronavirus.
Fears continue to grow over the outbreak of the Wuhan coronavirus.
Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus.
We have new information about how the Wuhan coronavirus is spread.
I hear Stephen Miller in this foreign virus setting up travel bans for the outside invasion of the disease. That's not the way.
The Chinese coronavirus that they've been
that's
calling
not
the first U.S. case of Chinese coronavirus.
The Chinese coronavirus.
This is coming as the Chinese coronavirus.
China's coronavirus outbreak.
China's coronavirus.
Outbreak anxiety. The death toll nearly doubles in China's coronavirus outbreak. China's coronavirus.
Just how bad is China's coronavirus?
And so, like, if we're gonna say that this stuff has been caused by people associating the virus with China, then it's not just Trump,
It's
or
not
it's
just
not
Trump.
just the Republicans.
But he is the most prolific person who did that. You know, like had the
he had the biggest splash
also
with it.
There's also this shot of his notes where he was going to come out and he had in his notes coronavirus.
Yeah.
And he, with his big dumb Sharpie,
Saw that.
went and put China.
Yeah.
So it's like he very specifically was like, no. We're not going to call this the coronavirus.
No.
We're going to call this the China
It was a part of his agenda. It's obvious.
Well,
even with the
he
Kung
clearly
Flu
doesn't
thing.
like China.
Yeah.
So like he saw it maybe as another way to get people to think
Jab at
like,
them.
hey, China's not good.
Yeah.
China's not our friends.
Right.
Not only because they steal your jobs, but also because they gave you this virus.
And that's divisive rhetoric that
Yes.
some people are pointing to and saying that divisive, insensitive rhetoric is what
what's
led to the
spurring
eventual uprising or uptick in crimes against the
Because the
Asian
uptick,
American community.
I've heard you quote a different number, but I've seen
That number I quoted, by the way, there's different numbers. There's like American wide, and then New York City was its own little subset.
because New York City is out of control
Yes,
with that shit.
that was
All
where-
the cases I've been
yeah.
seeing have been coming from New York. Dude.
There was like
what the
a
fuck?
380 or 430% increase since COVID in crimes against Asians in New York City specifically.
Yeah, but 150
Well, they also were hit the worst
American-wide.
with the
Coronavirus, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that
too.
might have bred so much.
And they tend to have some
insensitivity.
angry motherfuckers up there too.
Well,
bro. Like,
I mean,
there's
let's not
some
forget that
angry
that
motherfuckers
New
up
York City is the first stop that people get to as far as immigration back in the day, and it was also their first encounter with bigotry and stuff
It's
like
the melting
that. So,
pot.
like that's where it happens for most people as they immigrate into the country. If like back in the old day with Ellis Island and shit like that, like
But not with Asians though. Asians tend to migrate from the West. Obviously, they come from the other side.
'Cause we
So
used them to build the railroads.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so they came into San Francisco. They actually had their own. I did so much research on this.
Yeah.
And then let me tell you something, dude. This changed my whole view on everything. You know, like when George Floyd, when a lot of Black Lives Matter protests were going on and stuff, I was taking a more stance of like, I didn't think racism was that prevalent in our country, right? Anymore. And it's like more as I get educated, the more I start to see like, I just didn't understand history very well. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's something that has been proliferated over time in the way we select cops you spoke about earlier, the legislations that we've passed and things. And one of our favorite things to do in this society for some reason is when things go south, blame it on the Asian community. You know what I mean? Like it's like Asian, like people are pointing to it right now, but this is something that's been happening over the last 120 years or so, where situations that arise in our country, it's not just Asians. It's like blame it on anybody who's foreign or anybody who's of color.
The other,
right? Yeah, exactly. It's
Jewish people that you can't even tell if you just look at them.
Even Jewish people, but there has been a lot that was done to in a lot of these like kind of opinions and things I've seen that to mitigate immigration from the South, right? You know, like from Mexico and things like that. And then from the East, which is like on our western border and stuff, where as places like Ellis Island have brought in tons and tons and tons and tons of people, where people are more migrating from white European
Yes.
like destinations in
Ireland,
Germany,
Germany,
like all these people, where even Jewish people, where they were allowed to move into our country without those types of stipulations.
That's not necessarily true. I mean, even German Jewish people were very against the immigration of Polish Jewish people. Like,
we're talking about America.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
German Jewish people that lived here in America were very much against the idea of Polish Jewish people immigrating to America.
But there was actual legislation
I'm talking
banning
about, yeah.
I feel
Chinese.
you.
I'm talking about, like,
because it was the 1937 Chinese Exclusion Act where they were like, yeah, we don't want prostitutes in America, so we're gonna ban Chinese women. Which
yeah,
is
it's like what
associating
Trump
them.
did with the Islamic countries. He
Yeah.
was like,
We
we
don't
don't
want
want terrorists, so we're just not going to let any Muslim
Yes.
country people come over here.
100% same, and that's why when people say the divisive rhetoric is what's
Yeah.
causing these
Yes.
things, they can point to specific things like that.
I feel you on that. I'm just
I'm glad you bring up the Chinese Inclusion Act, because that was something I was going to talk about in this, because like I said, it's not something that's new. This was actually passed in 1882, and this is the only immigration law to ever exclude a specific group of people that's actually been passed. And not only did it pass, it ran in legislation for damn near 60-something years or 70 years, like from this time all the way to when they passed that reform in the 60s. That
I wonder where I
opened
got
it.
1937 from.
So there was a couple of different laws that happened out in this situation, right? Where it was first that, but dude, they passed this law, the Chinese Exclusion Act or whatever, and it was mostly because of what they always say, labor, right? Like they were bringing a lot of Chinese workers and stuff over to start the building of the transatlantic railroad or whatnot. And then so they started doing all that, but then when the transatlantic railroad's done, obviously they start, just proliferating out into society. A lot of them started joining in on the gold rush. And so a lot of them are start going out west trying to look for gold and stuff like that. And everybody's cool with it for a while everybody's finding gold. But as gold becomes harder and harder to find, they start getting mad at the fact that there's all this Chinese competition for it, right? And so they start bitching about it, complaining about it, there starts to be these like fights and stuff that break out in these old western towns. And
they literally restricted the ability for people that had come to fix on the railroad to become citizens.
Yeah.
Not only
facts.
did they try to stop more Chinese people from coming once they didn't really need them anymore,
Yeah.
but they were like, and also the ones that are here, you're not allowed to become a citizen, which means that you have no right to our gold.
Yes, 100%, which was nuts. And so then there was the Exclusion Act. Then there was like a reform where now I get the population was a lot different, but the reform allowed 105 Chinese people a year. Yeah. That was like their compromise, I guess, against this. And it was only like dignitaries and like, well-educated people and stuff like that who they thought. But if you were like just a worker or something, not allowed in. Now, following the Chinese Exclusion Act, right, they have this period that people call the driving out era. In this period, anti-Chinese Americans physically forced Chinese communities to flee to other areas. Large-scale violence in Western states included the Rock Springs Chinese Massacre and the Hell's Canyon Massacre. Now, dude, I read about these. You guys can check these out on their Wikipedia pages. But they're mass executions of entire Chinese populations. Like, we're talking about the idea of somebody just running up into Chinatown and killing 30 people.
Yeah, this sounds like Black Wall Street. This sounds like
100%, right?
Exactly.
Like there's this one where they come and they obliterate an entire like Sam Yup company mine or whatever, and then killed like just like I said, I think there's like 30-something people.
Nobody held accountable.
Nobody goes to prison for this. Nobody. There's just this sketchy investigation. So I mean, there goes back to that far. Then of course everybody knows about Pearl Harbor, right? Where we have Pearl Harbor, and then this is the first and probably only time where we've had government-sanctioned internment camps against these people, of Asian descent. Some other descents too that they rounded up a couple other people, but I mean. This is the history that we come from, where it's not just today. It's not just because of coronavirus. This is something that anytime that there's some type of governmental or like suspicion towards, what we deem our enemies, we start to persecute the people who are in our country, though, already. A lot of these people who are getting assaulted right now are Chinese fucking Americans. Like, they've never even been to China.
Yep.
These people's parents have
the
never
people
even
getting
been to
assaulted
China.
are just Asian.
That's what I'm saying.
Which
like,
is
they're
not
even Chinese.
They're just right. Yeah.
The man who was killed in San Francisco was from Thailand.
Yeah. Yep.
The guy who got slashed on the subway was also a different nationality. He was non-Chinese. So it's like this idea of like, the Chinese coronavirus is what's causing this is not necessarily causing it only for people of Chinese or Chinese American descent.
Right.
It's all Asians.
Right.
Because as America, they lump Asia all together.
Yeah.
Well, and because like there's the slight differences in their appearance is not so noticeable as being able to tell that's an Asian person.
Yeah.
So, and that's why they just refer to all Asians as Chinamen and stuff like that. So like,
Same way with Mexicans. Like
and it brings me to like, something that I've heard like Thomas Sowell and other economists talk about how employers, like they talk about how the West Indians who are black do a lot better than like Native American black, or not Native American, but just American black people and stuff like that. And he was like, it's very unlikely that an employer is going to look into the background of a black person to find out if they were from America or West India. Like they just see them as black, and so that's the thing is like they just see them as Asian, and so they just lump them all together.
Yeah. And then dude, it's been heinous, like I said, seeing this and stuff, but I don't know when it stops. Obviously we've made strides in our legislation to try to stop this, right? In the 1960s, I guess that's why it was a big deal, not just for civil rights for all people of color and stuff, but to stop these like immigration laws and stuff. I was looking for the actual number, maybe we can bring it up on screen right now, but like the comparison to this, because it's not all immigrants, like you said, we were allowing a lot of European descended people to come in as long as they were like kind of like white. There was even that stuff about, dude, I didn't know anything about race science. You know what I mean? Like how like people were really trying to publish these like scientific journals,
pseudo-scientific,
right, trying to prove that there was this superior race and that all this intermingling would like I just didn't know about that stuff, and seeing how this just continuously becomes a topic in our society, right? Like it just over and over and over. But the point I was saying, the number was how many immigrants there had been to Ellis Island, like I said, coming from that side of the world, compared to this Angel Island, which was set up specifically to take in Asian immigrants and stuff like that. I think it was like, dude, 1/4 maybe or something like that. It was like, and it's this obvious restriction where we build a border on the south end to keep Mexicans and Latino immigrants into the country, but like I said, they can pour into from the East Coast, and so it just seems really interesting. And
one of the things I saw in regards to the rise in this divisive racial rhetoric, I definitely keep my finger on the pulse of some of these forum sites where like manifestos are dropped and things like that are happening. And at the very early stages of COVID-19, they were absolutely in love with these threads about people dying in China. And it was a mega popular thread that was continuing over and over and over in these different forums that I was seeing people write articles about this, and referencing people from China as bugs, as less than human.
Just people spraying them with like hand sanitizer and shit in the subways and stuff.
Yeah.
And, like,
so I mean, it's not just Trump. It's not just, policies. It's also cultural, just a cultural shift. And as soon as COVID-19 hit and people found out about Wuhan and stuff like that, like if you were on the fence of racism, that probably tipped you over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because now you have the laboratory thesis where, people still think it was possibly made in a lab.
Yeah.
You've got China being our number one superpower enemy. You have Donald Trump constantly shitting on China.
Yeah.
Like you have all of these factors that end up with a Thai man being body checked on the street and dying from his injuries.
Dude getting slashed in his face.
Yeah.
While we're talking about this, if you don't think it's going on, did you hear this guy? I can't believe that this was in the middle of the thing. Like they talk about, they're actually having this.
Pause this while you're talking. I can't hear what you're saying.
Sure. No, like they're having this anti-Asian hate hearing in Congress. You were talking about this. Interesting enough, you brought this up about how the public opinion will sway the government and like how we go about Judicious?
Adjudicating.
Damn,
I believe it's adjudicating.
Yes, right. We'll sway that. And so, sure enough, we're already having like immediately following this an anti-Asian hate hearing in Senate, I believe. And this is what this Republican
today, for the first time
from Texas, has to say.
In 3 decades, the House held a hearing on anti-Asian violence and discrimination. The mood became tense after one lawmaker's comments brought an angry response.
We believe in justice, right? There's old sayings in Texas about, find all the rope in Texas and get a tall oak tree. We take justice very seriously, and we ought to do that. Round up the bad guys. My concern about this hearing is that it seems to want to venture into the policing of rhetoric in a free society. Now we're talking about whether talking about China,
she's like
Chi-Coms, the Chinese Communist Party, whatever phrasing we want to use. And if some people are saying, hey, we think those guys are the bad guys, I think the Chinese Communist Party running the country of China, I think they're the bad guys. And I think that they are harming people.
I want to go back to something that Mr. Roy said earlier. Your president and your party and your colleagues can talk about issues with any other country that you want, but you don't have to do it by putting a bullseye on the back of Asian Americans across this country, on our grandparents, on our kids. This hearing was to address the hurt and pain of our community and to find solutions, and we will not let you take our voice away from us.
Whew. That made the hair on my arms raise up.
Hell, so cringe. And that's what I said. Like, these are our lawmakers. These are the people who are making laws. Now, obviously, he's not the whole government or nothing. Like, he's just one representative. But
it's ridiculous.
He said, we believe in justice. Get the ropes and the tall tree. Like you said,
China is our enemy.
That's not justice.
That's not justice.
Lynching was not justice. It was mob justice. There's literally accounts of, I can't remember what the story was, but there was an account of when this judge dropped the case against this man, and the governor or somebody, some sort of politician or judge dropped some case against this guy. And what happened was he had to flee the whole state, and they broke into the jail, drugged this man out of his jail cell, and lynched him in the prison yard.
Doesn't sound like justice.
That's not justice. That's not justice.
And at an Asian, literally, it's an anti-Asian hate hearing in our government at the Capitol building, and he's like, China's our enemy.
Chi-Coms,
they're the enemy. And it's like, that is not helping at all.
Such a bad look.
You want to talk about optics, my dude?
To even use that analogy and then link it directly in the same conversation with China and say, like, these are the enemy and we need this kind of justice against it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Most
not only that, it's like, look, I don't think that the Chinese Communist government does the best things for their people, but I don't think that they should be lynched. That's not what you should do with them.
Yeah. But wait, there's
now,
more.
After that exchange, Congressman Roy, the rope and tree fella from Texas, later told NBC News that he had, quote, no apologies for his remarks. Kurt Bardella, your piece in the LA Times about the murders in Atlanta was very direct. You said Trump and the GOP put a bullseye on the backs of Asian Americans. Today, Kevin McCarthy was asked about his own past comments. We'll play his reply here.
Do you regret using terms like Chinese coronavirus? And
I would wait to see why the shooter did what he is, but if the virus came from China, and I think the knowledge we had at the time is exactly that. I don't think people, from the standpoint, should go after any Asian from any shape or form, and I condemn every action to that.
So, Kurt, there's your Republican leader in the House who, for the record, voted on the side of the insurrectionists. We've yet to hear from Mitch McConnell at all over in the Senate side on this. The question to you is,
anybody
are
that voted
Republicans
for checking out the election
or
is
unwilling
clearly an
to
insurrection.
recognize harm
like
from
they
the
threw
words
that case
they've
out.
used?
This is March 18th. We threw that case out.
Well, Brian, they're unwilling.
And the best example of that was today, when Chip Roy, at a hearing about violence and hate crimes against Asian Americans, thought that that was the appropriate time to quote Toby Keith's songs. Toby Keith, by the way, is from Oklahoma, not Texas, but be that as it may, to quote Toby Keith lyrics and use the image of lynching. And it just shows the ignorance of Republicans about history. Chinese Americans in Los Angeles were the target of one of the biggest lynchings in United States history in the 1870s. To use that type of imagery and that type of rhetoric, rope and trees, at a hearing convened to talk about hate crimes, and then to not even apologize for it, but to double down on it when confronted about it after the hearing, it just tells that Republicans, they're not incapable of understanding their rhetoric. They don't care.
I thought, but yeah, the dude just said flat out, he's like, no, I know what I said.
Doubled the fuck down.
Yeah,
he was like, yeah,
yeah.
big ass oak tree.
I will say that it's not Republicans. It's this guy and anybody that agrees with the idea that you should be able to say that we should, or at least insinuate that we should lynch our enemies at a hearing about Asian hate crimes. It's like ridiculous. But like, again, I just don't like the grouping.
Yes.
Like, Republicans obviously don't understand what they're talking about.
And we touch on this in this episode where we talk about the idea that it's like it's not all Republicans, just like it's not all white people, just like it's not all Trump supporters. It's factions of people within these groups that have these nefarious beliefs, like Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Well, not just all of them. Like I was telling you guys, but I think before we started the podcast and stuff, it's like those aren't the only people that were calling it the Chinese coronavirus. Like I said, I watched a whole 4-minute video of like tons of people on CNN calling it the China virus. So it's like, if you're going to blame that stuff, then you can't just talk about only the people that you don't like calling it that, because lots of people call it that.
My thing is intent, again, with the same thing with hate speech, right? Like, you saying this is a virus that comes from China is different than saying it's Kung Flu
or it's
the Chi Coms.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that when you're obviously trying to use it as like, yeah, they were being nefarious, you know, or like those motherfuckers got us, you know, we need to, you know, whatever.
Also, in the earlier days of coronavirus, it was probably more likely that they would use insensitive language, but I'm assuming that as time went on, places like CNN and MSNBC moved away from that language. And
I'm sure they did.
Were very careful.
Even like they were asking that dude, like, yo, like, do you regret it? He could have easily been like, and, you know, he didn't say I regret what I said or nothing. He was just like, and he did say I didn't condone any violence towards those people, which I get. But it's also just as simple as to say, yeah, you know, that probably wasn't the best.
Retrospect.
In retrospect, having seen what the outcome has been since then, it probably was not a good idea for me to refer to it as a Chinese
But then
virus.
you lose the support of the Trump public.
Exactly.
You lose support of the former president.
I heard I can't remember where I saw it, but it was like some guy used the defense of like, well, we called avian flu, and people didn't go out and start just trying to kill every bird they saw. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
we slaughtered millions of pigs for swine flu so that people didn't get it. Yeah. So that's not a good analogy.
It's not.
Yeah, it's wild. But I mean, obviously, like you said, we're trying to use them as a scapegoat, and I just think it's pure ignorance. You know what I mean? Like, even if the virus did come from China, hell, even if China did it on purpose, that does not mean that every single Asian person you see has more coronavirus than you do, or that is like the sole perpetrator of this you know,
or even like condones the actions. Like, if hypothetically speaking, Chinese people, like the Chinese government did do this on purpose and infect the world with this coronavirus, that doesn't mean that the Chinese people that live near you or the Asian people that live near you have anything to do with it. They'd probably be like, nah, I don't fuck with that.
You know look. If this virus had come from Sicily, would we be going to every Italian restaurant and smashing up their pies?
No, we would not. I don't think we would. I really do not think we would.
Because they're white-skinned.
Yeah,
well,
I
don't know.
I mean,
it's hard to say these days because there were literally there had to be like Italian rallies and stuff. Like, there was racism against Irish people. There was racism against Italians and stuff like that. Like, all white people aren't the same, and they don't all like each other. And I think that just to say like, oh well, if it was from Sicily, then we wouldn't be going to smash it. It's like hard to say because who was that guy? Some mafia dude had his head blown off at an Italian, like a pro-Italian rally that they were holding because Italian hate crimes were going up at that time. So it's like,
But didn't you
just
say he
because,
was a mafia guy too, though? So couldn't he have gotten his head blown off because he was in the mafia?
I wasn't saying that I wasn't trying to connect the fact that he got his head blown off at that. Like, it was because he was a mafia guy. But I was just saying he happened to be at a rally for Italian rhetoric because anti-Italian violence had sprung up because of the mafia.
Yeah.
Like, this is in the 80s. Like, when the mafia and stuff, like, people knew it was Italians that were doing shit like that, and they were really fucking with Italians.
Because I was going to say that this has happened, like you said, obviously.
This has happened to everybody.
Well, in the sense of the people who tend to go about proliferating this on the ground side tend to be very ignorant people, like we just said. So it's like you tell them that this is your boogeyman, and then they're going to go out there and they're going to get their boogeyman. You know, whether you say that that's Chinese people or whether you say it's, you know, pigs, you know, or whatever. Then
practitioners of Islam, whatever.
You know, lawyers. You say it, and then everybody's like, oh, they're on their lookout now. They're like, wait, you're a lawyer? Oh man, you did this, and it's like, what? Like, where are you getting this?
You got OJ
I saw
off,
it on
you
the
piece of
news.
shit.
Yeah, you know, it's like I had nothing to do with that case. Like,
I was 7. What are you talking about?
But I think the at the core issue with that is, and we've even fallen victim to it ourselves, is that the blanket attribution of traits. You know what I mean? It's like if
that's like the whole idea of racism,
right?
It's like I'm just judging you as like, oh well, if you're black, then you're not a good person for my children to hang out with.
Even when that lady says the Republican Party, it's like this one schmuckhead fucking
this one
representative,
fucking
dude.
guy.
Like there's like, you know, and maybe his handful of cronies or whatever. You know, it's like we need to practice more nuance in our blame. Even if you're gonna, I mean, I don't condone blaming people for anything, anyways, in the first place. But even if you're going to do it, like you said, like
there was no reason for that guy
the
to
Japanese
say,
government. Instituted Pearl Harbor. Not every Japanese person from here to Timbuktu.
Japan attacked us. It's like, no, the Japanese government attacked us.
Hey, and if you need an example, look at your own government. Are you the one that gave me all my stipends, you know, my stimulus checks? Did you build the wall?
Did you invade Iraq? You know? I did. Okay, I did. I'll take that one. Okay.
Another good stuff.
But another good one. But my point is, you know what I mean? Like, we are not our government. You know, like the people are not these big institutions, you know, like,
and it doesn't even have to play into with just government stuff. Like, just because you're seeing like white supremacy, like white supremacists are bad, but not all white people are white supremacists. So just because you see white people doing heinous acts against other people of color does not mean that all white people hate people of color.
Not every Trump supporters are racist.
Not every cop is going to kill unarmed
everybody.
Black people.
100%.
Like,
man.
it's
just always.
It's this jumping to conclusions. It's this lumping everybody into the same boat, and it's like that's the kind of thinking that leads us to these things that we're talking about right now. And so just because you're saying it in response to this action, to be like, well, clearly these Republicans don't understand their history because, and what he's saying is true. Like, that's like, a lot of people don't know that lynchings didn't just happen to black people. Like, white people got lynched, Asian people everybody got lynched. Like, they were just, if anybody that you didn't like and you had enough people to get them and hang them up in a tree, they got lynched. And so it's like, Witches. Yeah. Like,
I mean, the imagery is associated with like the antebellum South, and you know,
because it's where it happened most. You know, like, you
well,
can
it's
have
also freshest on our mind.
And it's been associated through time as we've come farther and farther from that time period. Most of the stories that you hear about, and I'm not gonna sit here and say like it wasn't most black people that got lynched. I don't know for sure, but I mean, if I had to take a guess, I would if I had to bet on it, I would bet that most black people got lynched, or most of the people that got lynched were black. But and there's a whole a lynching museum. I can't remember where it's at. Maybe in Louisiana, Alabama.
I've heard about
there's
it.
There's an official lynching museum that talks all about these different lynches, and it goes through the timelines, and it's I want to go visit it sometime just to kind of like learn more about the history of this country and just how people interact with other people. But it's the idea of blanket statements, group think, and stuff like that. Like, those are the problems, whether or not it's towards Asians or it's towards Republicans or it's towards any other group that you can identify. You can't judge everybody by what groups they happen to fall into, or that you think that they fall into.
I'm surprised too. Like, so we did see the deadliest shooting against Latinos in 2018. Do you think that had anything to do with Trump's rhetoric as well? because at the same time, or before coronavirus, the flavor before that from 2017 to 2018, that era was the immigration, was the border crossings, was the that was a huge talking point. And then we saw a mass murder against Latinos at an El Paso Walmart. That was the worst one ever perpetrated against Latinos in a mass shooting fashion. So it's like, are those correlated in any way? And same thing with QAnon. QAnon is, and at some of its roots, anti-Semitic. That's why that guy won't support Trump, because Trump supports Israel. So the QAnon shaman's not going to be a Trump supporter. He's going to support insurrection and things like that, because QAnon wants to disrupt the system, because at its heart, QAnon is anti-Semitic.
He did actually say he was an avid Trump supporter. It was the other Trump supporters that didn't want to take the blame for the Capitol riots that threw him under the bus and said he was Antifa. But he might not know back on a response tweet and was like, I fuck with Trump heavy.
Well, it's a bit of a symbiotic relationship between QAnon and Trump,
because,
but it's not necessarily like, QAnon fully supports Trump or vice versa, but it is somewhat symbiotic. But the idea being that QAnon does have tons of anti-Semitic rooting within it, that could potentially have been what led to the shooting in 2019, which is the worst one perpetrated on Jewish people in America. So it's like, is this divisive rhetoric, is this violent language causing these events? It's definitely not fucking helping.
Yeah, I think that you can say that it's not helping for sure, but causation as far as like, there's way too many variables in these specific circumstances to say that Trump's rhetoric caused this.
I think that's a factor. It's like it's
a factor. Every variable plays into it. It's
that's
like
your leader of your country.
Yeah, your recipe. Just because you only put a quarter teaspoon of a certain ingredient in the recipe, it played into the way that the dish tasted. But that's like saying like, oh, the quarter teaspoon of salt that I put in this recipe caused it to give you an allergic reaction or something. Like, well, there's a lot of things that happen in
I call this dish salt. Well, it has salt in it. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
No, I would say like
it's definitely not helping.
I would make that a more general statement and say that politics do that though, right? Like,
I would agree with that.
This is why a lot of people talk about being careful with what we report in the media, right? Like you report on car accidents, guess what? Car accidents go up.
Yeah.
You report on mass shootings go up.
You put beautiful pictures of the Zarnev brothers on the cover of Time, and people are going to start actually thinking of them as martyrs.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think that's played into a lot of these, prolific incidences in society where people have targeted certain groups or things or whatever, right? It's like, it's easy. We talked about this in past episodes, how it's easy for people to get incepted with certain ideas, and then take those ideas to an extreme that maybe like these guys, they don't, and that's the thing that they were saying is like, sometimes these guys don't understand how far their language reaches, because to them they say, I'm just saying it's a Chinese virus. I didn't say assault Asians, but you don't understand how that gets interpreted from somebody else.
Gets the ball rolling.
Yeah, and then they take that and they build on that. It's like kind of like we talked about with conspiracies, right? It's like it starts off as a pretty general, like you pretty much believe this is true, but then when we play telephone with it and we get with our other friends and bounce it around, they're like, oh, but maybe look at this, look at the way he blinked his eyes,
he said tippy top,
yeah, maybe he's this, and then you spread that to the next guy and they're like, word, I didn't know that, and then until next time, somebody shooting up a pizza parlor or some shit, it's like, who knows? So I definitely say that plays into it though. Yeah. Like you said, it definitely does not help when the leader of the free world or whatever is up there being like, it's these guys. It's like, yikes.
And he hit that hard on the campaign trail leading up to 2020.
Oh, yeah.
Hit it very hard on the campaign trail. China.
I mean, we did a whole little bit on the fact that he just loves to, and like this dude's following suit. Roy, he said, yo, these are the enemy. Like there's obviously there's a little coalition within the Republican Party that's very anti-China,
Yeah.
Which, I mean, trust me, I got my skepticism of the Chinese government as well. You know what I mean? Like I don't necessarily, not skepticism, that's what I say, I would not go as far as to call them our enemies, but they're definitely our direct competitors, you know what I mean? And that's like for world domination.
I just say that I don't trust what they say.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what they got going on over there, but it seems sketchy to me.
Yeah.
I don't have any like, like the Uyghur Muslim thing, the CRISPR baby thing, the fact that people just disappear and then reappear later and then come out and say like that woman, who's that woman, their actress, like there's like one of their most famous actresses just disappeared off the face of the planet for 3 months and then came back and like swore her allegiance to the Chinese government. And it's like, that's sketch. That doesn't happen in free societies. You know what I mean? Like in free societies, you're allowed to be like, I don't fuck with my government. And you don't disappear. And you don't come back 3 months later being like, actually, I was wrong. I do fuck with my government. Like that's fucking sketch.
They've been strengthening their Navy. In their economy. In a lot of different ways, it looks like they're gearing up to not just be our direct competitor, but be a superpower comparable to us in the sense of like, oh, you wanna start some shit. You're not going to just roll over us. You know, it's, and whether or not they're fucking with our elections or things like that is still also like an unknown quantity. So it's difficult because what he's saying is not completely off base. China is a direct competitor and could lead to an eventual armed conflict. But you definitely don't bring that shit up in the anti-Asian hate hearing.
God,
you don't bring it.
like,
There is a time and a place.
And you don't link it to an insinuation of lynching.
Oh, jeez.
Like if you want to, like, we didn't lynch people from the Nuremberg trial. We put them on trial for war crimes and human rights violations and shit like that. We didn't just lynch them. Like that's we've gotten past that. We're not lynching people anymore, Roy Chip.
I just don't understand how you elect somebody who thinks that that's justice. You know what I mean? Like he said, like we believe, like just.
You know what? There's like recalls happening in California for Gavin Newsom and for different district attorneys and stuff going on. If I don't hear about the district that this man represents in Texas doing a recall for this motherfucker, I will be absolutely disappointed in my fellow Texans because I was born and raised in Texas. And as someone who still really fucks with Texas, I can tell you that I don't fuck with that guy.
Either way, interesting. Stop beating up Asian people out there,
please.
man.
Please. For the
love of God.
Just stop beating up people in general. Like you said, like the fuck out of here with that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like it's clownery, man. Just
you don't hurt people and you don't take their stuff.
Take care of yourself.
How about this? Let's just cure hate.
Yeah, hey, I love that sign.
Hate
is a virus. Yeah, that's the hashtag, and it's definitely gonna be hashtagged on this video because that shit that's the biggest fucking pandemic we have out here in our society.
Take it individually upon yourself. Stop hating.
Yeah, for real.
Just stop. Whatever you hate right now, think about it. What do you hate? Stop fucking hating.
Let that shit go.
Let it go. I hate mayonnaise. Okay, I'll go try some. I'll do it. I'll go eat some fucking mayonnaise right now.
Get some mayonnaise with this man.
Yeah, we'll do it. I'll do it on camera. I'll snort a line of this shit.
He's not gonna do it. So anyways, it's actually a pretty good law. I was trying to read about it a little bit. One of the things, like as part of pattern practice investigations, so they can start like just kind of like getting information from I guess you couldn't subpoena the police departments before that or whatever. So that's very interesting. They also gave them the state attorney general to create an independent process to investigate misconduct and excessive use of force. This I think is if police were misusing their force or whatever, then they investigated themselves.
Yes, the State Bureau of Investigation is who steps in usually, which is a police body.
Right, exactly. So now they have the state attorney general, who's a separate entity.
Well, the independent thing is the independent process thing is the big one because that's saying that you have the power to say like, okay, instead of the State Bureau of Investigation or the Department of State Department whatever handling this, we're gonna let Robert Mueller step in and have an independent investigative body.
Yeah, but that's the problem is that it's up to the state's attorney general to decide who this independent process or people are going to be.
Yeah.
And
there's
so
always
it's
a point there.
And that's the thing is like if somebody within, because you were talking about how the state Bureau of Investigation or if it's a small time offense, it's just internal affairs, goes after the investigation for the police, which is a police body. And so it's like the state attorney general is just a prosecutor.
Correct.
So it's still in the legal jurisdiction, like the judicial jurisdiction.
It's still a nexus for
the
corruption.
problem is that the state's attorney general, if they're the person that gets to decide who makes up this independent body, then it could be independent from the police force, but not non-biased, which is kind of what you also want. You need an independent and non-biased investigation.
I feel like that's a lot more I mean, it's like saying
it's a good step.
It's like the difference between the legislative branch or like the Senate and the executive branch. Like, yeah, they work together, but they're not necessarily like in cahoots.
But it's still a turning point, like a crux, a nexus of corruption, where the state attorneys general now has the power to say, like, okay, I want this investigative process that's going to be independent to go the way I want it to.
Right.
So I'm gonna put my boys in there.
But like, who else would you know what I mean? Who else would you give it to?
I don't know.
That's the hard part. Yeah, it's like it's all.
There's always a nexus of corruption.
What takes me to, I can't remember her name, the attorney general that got elected. Oh God, why is her name escaping me? But her whole campaign, I think she was in New York, but her whole campaign was basically like, I'm gonna get Trump, like very much in the line of the KGB guy. Forgetting his name now too, but the dude from the KGB was Stalin, and he was like, find me the man and I'll show you the crime. Like, we're gonna find crimes of people that you don't like. And so like she got elected on the whole idea, like, we're gonna go in and we're gonna get Trump for these crimes that we all know he's committed but we just can't prove yet. And so it's like someone like that, it's hard to say would be non-biased towards a unarmed black man being killed by a white police officer investigation.
And this ain't the first time in American history where somebody like a state attorney general, I mean, look at Nixon. Nixon had a hit list. You know what I'm saying? So like you said, find the person and I'll find you the crime. That's been happening in our highest levels of government for a long time.
Yeah.
I think, but I will say to the point of these.
It's a good step though.
Yeah, exactly. That's
I mean,
the point.
as long as it's not you doing it.
Well, the first one
mean?
too.
Like,
if you scroll up to that top bullet point there, that really jumped out at me. The pattern or practice. Because if you look at like the Michael Brown case in Ferguson, Missouri, they went on and investigated, and I'm trying to remember who the African American attorney general for the federal attorney general guy was. You know what I'm talking about? He has a tiny little mustache.
A lot of misnames in here. They'll be floating around.
Yeah, they'll be floating around. But basically, I think it was Obama's attorney general. But anyways, they went in and they found a pattern. They found that the police force in Ferguson, Missouri was targeting this area, targeting individuals within this certain place. And it was a lot of bullshit. And so this idea of pattern or practice.
Well, I think the bigger point is too, is you brought this up plenty of times because you were investigating that one that was kind of like in your hometown or whatever. Yeah. But prior to this, the police department could just be like, no.
Yeah, no.
Like, hey, we want to see, some records and things from other cases and this and that. And they could be like, no, thank you. So now they can actually subpoena that stuff and like see all their handlings of certain, whatever. Yeah. So that's a big deal. Even just the opening of like all that stuff that they hide. There's some other things in here, like now that, they got to enforce the body worn cameras, the dashboard cameras and things like that. Yeah, but it's very interesting because it only requires federal police to do it and anybody who takes federal grant money or whatever. So if your police department is fully run on state money or does not depend on, you can still do whatever the fuck you want to with no.
For which one of those policies?
For a majority of them. I mean, you can go through and read them all specifically yourself because, there it is for the body worn cameras. There it is for the dashboard cameras that receive federal funding to ensure. Yeah.
Yeah, that federal funding clause is.
Well, it's also very unlikely that many of these metropolitan areas where these issues crop up a lot of are not taking federal money. And that's kind of just one way. And I think maybe what the reasoning for that is, I don't know. I'm just making an assumption here, some conjecture. But that might have been something that was input into each of these provisions in order to get it passed, so that the Republicans, who are much more on like a states' rights kind of thing, to be like, well, like a compromise, some sort. Like they probably wanted to be like all state and local, federal or state, local, and federal police officers have to wear body cams.
And they're like, well, you don't.
And they were like, yeah, you don't get to say that because the state has some of its own rights and stuff like that. And so they were like, all right, if you take federal money, then this federal law applies to you.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing is, like, otherwise you would have to wait for each state individually to implement all of these provisions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and that leaves a dirty little loophole, though, because I can imagine one of these small towns in the South that has maybe 120,000 people in it, that has its own police department and all these other things, just being like, we make plenty of money. Yeah. Without the federal government stepping in.
Yeah,
we're going to investigate ourselves. We're going to not wear our body cameras. And I'm not saying like you assign nefarious context to that immediately, but they can have the legitimacy of being like, oh, well, we handle it ourselves. We don't need federal funding.
But again, like you said, I think that and you're right. But no law is perfect. I think that these are really big steps forward.
Agreed.
Because but prior to this, everybody could do that.
Yep.
So now he does restrict. Because like you said, I agree with you too. That it's only probably the rural areas and the smaller guys that are not getting federal funding. I imagine like Baltimore, Philly, like all these big metropolitan areas, they're taking some type of dollars in.
Oh yeah.
Here's another big one: restrict the transfer of military equipment to police. We did a whole episode on this about how we need to stop giving them tanks and shit like that.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
that is coming into play. It only says restrict though, so we'll see what that means. The things that people have been asking for: no more chokeholds. They're even requiring everybody who takes federal funding to adopt anti-discrimination policies and training programs, including those that targeted at fighting racial profiling. So exactly what you were just
depending
talking
on
about.
what kind of programs you're bringing in.
I mean, I hear you, but I mean, like he's saying, like that's a step instead of trying to push white supremacy into the shit. Now they're trying to encourage the opposite. So,
and I think that one big thing
fixes.
that we have to remember with this legislation and with everything that we were just talking about, the solution is not to defund the police. If anything, all of these things that we're trying to implement to make the police station, like the police forces better, require more funding. And like you said, paying them more and making it like a more distinguished role and stuff like that. Like that requires more money, like not less money. You don't get better police with less money. You get less police.
I'll agree.
I have a question for you guys. Do you think that the protests that came about directly from the death of George Floyd had a positive impact in our society? Like, did the protest get this legislation passed, or was it good question. Or could you point at something else? Because like I would say that the riots, and I'll call them riots because there was a lot. I mean, there was protests, but there was a lot of riots too.
There was spatters of rioting happening within those protests.
There was a light smattering of rioting happening within those protests, and I think both the protests and the smattering of riots led to this legislation.
Yeah, I'll disagree with the riot part, but I mean, protesting. I mean, that's why you protest, right? Like they were able to pass legislation in the civil rights era, right, without the spattered of rioting. So it's
that is not true.
Well, I mean, the Million Man March nobody really points towards there being a lot of rioting in that.
Well, technically a lot of rioting happened after the Civil Rights Act, but rioting definitely got a lot of shit passed. And I was going to take the opposite realm. Like, I think more so the riot. I'm not pro-riot. But if anything, I think that the riots played maybe more of a role than the protests themselves, because that shit, it scares people. And scared, you take a lot of actions out of fear. And I'm not saying that those are the best actions to take, but that also, I think, played a role. And I would say maybe perhaps a larger role than the protests themselves.
I'll say that it was the number of people who stood up and said, this is wrong. Right? Yeah. Now, if you stood up and used violence to say that's wrong, sure. But again, slippery slope here. Like in a way, we are saying that violence and terror is like a good way to get what you want,
justified.
And it's not really like it
depends, because
that actually I think stalled the process a lot, because then it changed the whole conversation, right?
I feel you.
Like then it was all about like, oh, you guys are out of control, and it's like, no, we're trying to prove a point here. And so I think that let's just assume that there was no rioting, right? And then all those people just protested, just peacefully out in the streets, the marching, the chanting, the social media campaigns, everything. But when you have an entire society stand up and say, yo, this is bullshit, we don't want to fuck with this no more, I think that sways those people. Because like we talk about, again, politicians, they do inadvertently work for the people, but only the mass people, right? So they don't give a fuck about you, but they do give a fuck about 10,000 yous, right?
I feel you.
That is like, oh shit, this is my re-election here. Like if I don't make the right decision on this stuff, everybody's gonna point to that and say, this is why you suck at your job and you need to get the fuck out of here. Yeah. And so I think that by standing up and making this the unpopular thing to oppose, right? Like you can't just come out here and say, I don't fuck with that George Floyd shit. Like if you were to do that, then you would, it's like social suicide, essentially. And I think political suicide, exactly is my point. So I think that yes, the protests so much, yes. I mean, and obviously the riots were a part of that. So I mean, that's it. But I think you could have achieved the same end goal without all of the violence and destruction.
Possibly.
I'm not saying I promote the criminal disobedience, but I see it used as a tool to effect change in this case, and I think without that criminal disobedience, there would not have been as swift or as overreaching of a change.
You bring up a perfect segue into what my kind of closing point on that question would be, which is that if it wasn't for quote unquote criminal disobedience, we would not be in the country that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Because it took a goddamn war.
Pouring tea into a fucking bay, too. Don't forget about that one.
Yeah, and that wasn't even England tea. That was just regular individual people who had paid for that tea, and they were just like, fuck, to make a point, we're going to throw your tea into the ocean.
I mean, I won't disagree that war is a persuasive tactic. I just think that I would not want to proliferate that, because I like to think, that possibly we could create a society where we accomplish these things without that. You know what I mean?
I will say that
that's
as
idealist,
a caveat,
but like
as a caveat, the system in England was not really set up in the best way of like serving the people, quote unquote. So, like you could make an argument that perhaps in the way that we handle politics and government in this country, now that it is set up, you have less of a need for violent disobedience against the government. But I think that I'd like to hope so as well. And I actually do believe that. But I think that there is a point where that line, like that is a line in the sand, and sometimes it must be crossed.
One thing I want to take a little bit back a second for the viewers and stuff when we're talking about the case. Like, I don't know how caught up you guys are with the case and stuff. Like you said, it is popping off right now, and there's been a couple different little hot topics so far involving that. Like what charges are being brought up against him and
jury
stuff.
selection.
Jury selection's been a big deal. The location of the trial has been a huge deal too, and so I think breaking down those different little bits about it is where really the sauce is in this whole thing. Because I mean, we're talking, it's about to get sticky, boys.
Oh yeah,
it's about to.
This
get
is going to be the
sticky.
trial. A lot of people say this in many trials, but this is the trial of the decade, maybe the quarter century.
For sure, has to be.
I don't know about the century, but it's a big fucking trial.
Hey, look, if we talk about how like all the civil unrest led to the passing of that law and this and that, if we don't see justice, the sketchy part about it too is not even just justice, but people have their own idea of what they think the justice should be.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's really important how he breaks down each charge, because that was the one thing I knew from jump. Like when they took third-degree murder off the table in the start, everybody got in a tizzy about that, right? And they were like, "Well, you're only going to charge a manslaughter. Like, that's obviously murder." And it's like, you got to understand how law is prosecuted and written and works.
He was actually originally just charged, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of was it Minneapolis, Minnesota? Yeah, so the Attorney General of Minnesota, or maybe it's just Minneapolis, I can't remember if he's the state or just the municipal Attorney General, but he charged Derek Chauvin initially with just second-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. And then recently they added third-degree murder into the charge list, probably because of the reason that he was talking about. Like, it's more vague, and maybe they think it's like easier to prove than second-degree murder. And I mean, I'm no legal expert or anything, but based on the way that he described second-degree murder, it just doesn't sound like they had anything, especially when he talked about the when provision of like if you don't intend to kill them and you're doing these like risky actions when you're violating a court order of, like when you're not even allowed to be near that person. So why would you be near them doing things that might cause their death? But I was so confused when I first heard about this, because I was like, well, there's only one dead person, George Floyd. And so how can he be charged with multiple murders and multiple...
Yeah, this was confusing.
This is confusing, very confusing, because I was like, how can you be charged with multiple murders if there's only one victim, one
this is a
one
common
dead person?
Practice of overcharging, so that it's like throw a bunch of things at them and then see
one of them
you can get to
one of them sticks to the wall, as it were. And so depending on the way that the statutes are written and the interpretation of those statutes, you can actually be convicted of multiple counts of murder if only one person has been killed. And it depends on in the state and the legality and how the statutes are written.
All about how the laws are written.
Exactly. And so it becomes very important. Like, maybe in that clip you thought, well, he's being very particular about the words in the statutes and what they mean and stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of how the law works. Like, if you don't think, like, that's why the interpretation of like the Constitution is very important, because depending on how you interpret what those words say, that will determine whether or not somebody is guilty of something or somebody is not guilty of something. And one thing that I took a note here when he was talking about third degree murder, and he was saying, like he made a big deal about the idea of committing an act that was dangerous to others. And now that depends on the subject of the statement, because if the subject of the statement is the defendant in the case, the person who perpetrated this, the perpetrator, then others would mean anybody other than the defendant. So like if you're doing a dangerous act to yourself and only you can be harmed by it, that's one thing. But if you're doing a dangerous act to yourself and other people can be harmed by it, then that could fall under third-degree murder if something happens to somebody else. Whereas the way he interpreted it, he was thinking that others applied to other victims. So the idea of the original victim that the charge is for is implicit somehow, and you'd have to read the statement itself to understand. But I thought that was interesting on the first time that I watched this video, and I was like, well, others, like, is the subject of that statement the perpetrator or is it the initial victim? Because you're saying someone who commits an act that is eminently dangerous to others. The way that I understand that statement is that others would be other than the person who's committing the act.
Anybody else than the subject of the law, I would agree. But
yeah, so
he's trying to interpret it as, like you said, like the Breonna Taylor thing, like if you're going to try and kill. But then, that's still assuming some type of intent of like, I was trying to kill this dude and I accidentally killed all these other people. And so those other people are some type of third-degree murder or something. But I don't know. It's tricky.
Yeah, I interpret it the way you interpret it. When it says like, like danger to others, like the others is the guy with the knee on his neck. Like
that includes him.
That's an other.
Yeah, that's the others.
Yeah, and so that's why I was like, well, that's a very interesting, because he was saying it's like a strained reading if you would include like the victim in that others, and I was like, well, I do, because I'm pretty sure the subject of that sentence is the perpetrator. Yeah. So it would include the victim.
Right.
That's the whole point.
I thought that was a strange.
Like if you like that guy who blew himself up in Nashville over Christmas break and stuff, like if he had inadvertently killed somebody, if somebody was asleep and they didn't hear his warning or whatever like that, I feel like he could be charged with third-degree murder because he wasn't intending to kill them, but he was doing a dangerous act to himself, but he was endangering other people as well. And so like others extends past the person doing it. And so it's tricky.
It's tricky, but the thing I think is the real sauce or meat and potatoes of this whole idea is understanding, because this is what I had to go down this road too. Because when you said the same thing, when I was like, how are they bringing up multiple charges against one dude for the same thing? I was confused. But it's harder to prove different degrees of murder and then and manslaughter, and I think that's where it's going to get tricky though, because a lot of people feel like he really intended to kill him, what I mean, like that there was intent. And I think that as the case goes on, we're going to see that he doesn't get charged with that. It's going to be more of like a negligence thing, like of like I didn't know my knee on him, like that was going to kill him type thing. And then I think it's going to result in manslaughter. This is just my prediction of it, just from my very limited interpretation of the law. Like I said, not from a social standpoint. I mean, I think that what he did was fucked beyond belief, and like the time that he spent on his neck and all these things, it felt very like you were trying to be malicious, but you thinking that and proving that in court are just
two totally different scenarios.
I would say one of the things, if I was the prosecutor, that I would point towards is his hands in his pockets. That to me is so, it's just this nonchalance of the violence he's committing.
I'm sure they'll bring that up. Now it depends though, because you could also, if that would either point towards negligence, but I don't think that you could bring that up in the sense that you were trying to prove intent because he had his hands in his pockets. That might actually, like, depending on the way that you interpret that action, that might actually, you could make that seem like he was very unaware that it was any way dangerous to this person's life. I mean, by taking such a nonchalant
I would paint it as if you can do this maneuver that led to this man's death with your hands in your pockets, there's got to be a better way to affect this position or whatever it is you were trying to do, which they could argue, he was just trying to subdue him.
Right, yeah.
The fact that you're subduing him with your knee on his neck while your hands are in your pockets tells me that there's a million other ways you could do this, and that's not the best way.
Right, but I think that leans more into negligence rather than intent to kill.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that's what I'm saying is, like, it's very difficult. It seemed, as a juror, if I put myself in the position of a juror, even if the prosecution's trying to paint that in a way to make it seem like, well, he had his hands in his pocket, so clearly he was, like, trying to kill him. And I'm like, I
wouldn't say clearly trying to kill him. I would say he's clearly using a technique that is not the preferred method, because why would the preferred method
No, but that's why we're saying
that falls under negligence
to second degree.
That doesn't fall under intent.
Yeah.
Well, if you could show that he's trained in all those techniques, why would you choose the one that has the knee on the neck as opposed to the one where you're just holding him down?
As a caveat to you, I think something that would be much better for the prosecution to try to point towards intent would be the fact that these people knew each other from the past.
That's what I was going to say.
This is not the first time that they have met, and they had issues. They used to work in the same place. Now, this is interesting because there's reports of how the defense wants to be able to show evidence from a 2019 arrest around the very same time, like May of 2019, when he was being approached by police officers and he swallowed a bunch of opiate pills to kind of like, I don't know, get rid of evidence, or I don't know much about that case because he wasn't famous then. But they want to be allowed to, and they're asking the judge to be allowed to present that information to the jurors once the trial begins, because they think that it goes into the idea of what he said his defense is going to be, which is that the drugs actually killed him. It wasn't my knee on his neck. And I think that if they're going to be allowed to do that, then I think that the prosecution should absolutely be allowed to bring up the fact that they knew each other from the past. And I don't know if that's like, because it's not an actual legal case, they probably don't have to ask permission to bring that up. But if I was his fucking if I was a prosecutor, I would definitely bring that up and be like, well, they actually knew each other. And I think that would point way more to intent to kill, because they had bad blood before. And so once he realizes that it's this man that he didn't like in the past being arrested, then you could say like, well, maybe once he realized that this was this person, you could say that he did have some intent.
And on top of that, if he realized this was the person he knew and this person had a history of swallowing drugs in fear of being prosecuted, he could have been more or less aware that this man was possibly overdosing and that a knee on the neck could lead to his eventual death.
Yeah. And I didn't clip it into this because this is from a much longer video, but I didn't put this part in. But he also talks about how in cases, whether civil or criminal, like whenever people receive money for like the death of their child or whatever, for some reason, the amount of money that is settled on can sometimes be split up between multiple parties based on the amount of culpability and in the causation of the death. And so he was saying like, it's called the eggshell skull provision or something like that. But basically, like if you punch like as an example, if you punch somebody in the head, and normally they would be able to recover from it, but this person has a weakened skull from some sort of birth defect or something like that, then those kinds of things play into the causation. Whereas like if multiple parties have something to do with the causation, then the guilt can be spread out between those parties, and you have to kind of decide who's more culpable, who's less culpable. But isn't that still
manslaughter though?
Well, I'm not saying that it
like
applies
if you assault somebody.
He's just talking about like the mitigation of
right, because if the argument for the defense is going to be causation of death, then even if you say that he had these drugs in his system, and from what I've heard, they're very trace amounts, not like overdose amounts of fentanyl.
They definitely wouldn't have killed him without the neck.
Exactly, though. That's the thing. It's like, okay, whether or not he had drugs in his system, there was not an amount of drugs that we know that is fatal to people of his stature and of his health, so even it doesn't matter. He's a big guy, and I heard I keep hearing trace amounts. Now I don't know what trace amounts means, and who's saying that could be different. But if he didn't have enough drugs in his system that would normally be fatal for someone like him, then it doesn't matter that he had the drugs in his system, because even if they did play some sort of small role, the catalyst of the death was your knee on his neck, not the drugs. It's not like he was gonna die anyways, and then you just happen to be there when it happened. The majority of the culpability happens to be on the knee on the neck, and that's what I believe.
And I would say that out of the two different camps I've seen, the more common one from the right-leaning side is that he was going to overdose anyways.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot, like way, way more from the right than anybody else. Like I've seen a few left-leaning people in my sphere of influence say like, you got to factor in the fact that he was possibly overdosing. And it's like, until the trial happens and we see what amounts of what drugs were in his system, and we hear from testimony from professionals and doctors and things like that, I don't think we can reasonably make a jump and say, oh, he was definitely going to OD.
Yeah.
But in our current age of bipartisan binary politics, you're either he died from a knee on his neck, or was going to die from an overdose anyways.
Yeah. Derek Chauvin just happened to be on top of him.
And there's, I believe, just like in all things, there's a spectrum there.
Yeah.
I think that slider is pretty far onto the knee on the neck.
If the knee's on the neck for 1 minute and 43 seconds, I might.
You'd have a much better case of getting off.
Yep, good
but,
point.
I mean, 9 minutes,
That's tough.
Jeez. That's tough.
That's tough. And trace amounts of drugs, I don't know. But I mean, I feel, and that's the thing that I hope people take into consideration with this is that law is like a court of law is not a court of personal opinion.
It's
right?
very particular.
This man gets the right to argue his case and say bullshit like that,
and
like have the,
whether or not you like this man or whatever, you have to go into as being a judge or jurors, you have to go in with the assumption of innocence.
Oh, okay.
That's a huge part of like the legal frame of our judicial system is an assumption of innocence until proven guilty.
Now, do you think that's possible in this case, though?
Absolutely not.
I would say in a large number of cases in this world, especially controversial ones, that's just impossible.
Yeah, there's no way.
To throw the entire case out based on this impossibility of, he has to get a fair trial. You can make it as fair as possible. But if you walk into the middle of Times Square and shoot someone on camera, you're never going to get a trial where you're presumed innocent first.
Well, see, now that's not necessarily true, right? In that instance, right? Only because like Times Square, so everybody in New York will know, right? But as long as it doesn't hit national news and stuff, you could have that case in Oregon or something and still
the
find
people don't know,
have no clue.
And that's
the problem is that, like we just talked about, this shit passed a goddamn bill on the House floor. Like
there were protests all over the world.
Everybody
Paris,
knows.
Prague, Siberia, London.
You know
like
what I mean?
literally people who were so far removed from American culture know about this
That's
case.
like trying to find somebody who don't know what the coronavirus is. Like people know about this shit. Like ask somebody, hey, you ever seen the Tiger King documentary? Yes. Everybody's seen the Tiger King documentary. You know what I mean?
Even
like,
if you haven't,
you heard about it.
You heard about it.
You've heard about it.
Yep. And you've seen the memes.
That's why as much as I think it's super bullshit that this case is going down in Minneapolis, like that is wild to me, but I get the rationality behind that. Like where else are you going to go? I think that you could limit the flow of information because you were talking about how those two jurors got knocked out of this whole thing. Mm-hmm. The reason they got knocked out of this was because Minneapolis just passed a settlement, right? Like they just gave George Floyd.
It was more because they announced it.
Right.
It was not necessarily because most of the time settlements, they're undisclosed information. You don't know that they've been announced. It's not until many years afterwards that you find out that the settlements haven't been made. You can make an assumption because whatever happened didn't go to trial or whatever, but is because they announced in the middle of jury selection a record-breaking settlement for this, like a civil settlement. And it's like they paid $27 million to George Floyd's family. Yeah. That's a pretty huge.
They were even complaining,
like what seems to be an admission of guilt from the city.
The defense was even like, they even said like the council has unanimously decided that we should give them 27, like even the language. So now I could see if you were to move it out of Minneapolis anywhere, right? Like I don't think that there's a lot of people like my friends in the hometown Texas who heard about that, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like now that the main shit's kind of moved on and like the rest of the general populace has kind of moved on, they might know that the case is going on, but these specific details and things they're not necessarily as privy to. And so I could see how that would be more beneficial if it wasn't necessarily right smack in the middle of Minneapolis, but I still get what they're saying too.
Yeah, the courthouse where the trial will happen is literally just a few blocks away from where he died.
Because that is a big deal. Like if they fuck this up, like the riots happen in their hometown. You know what I mean? Like It's not like, you know what I mean? Like if you can be more impartial if you live somewhere else and stuff like that where the consequences don't really fall so heavily on your head.
Exactly.
But these people, I mean, you might be making these juries like decisions and stuff based on the fact that like you just want to go home to a peaceful community and neighborhood. You know?
Right,
like,
yeah.
Fuck if this motherfucker is guilty or... I just think it's going to be hard for them to find jurors who are not already with the assumption of guilt.
I agree. Yeah. I also think that the idea of an anonymous jury does not mean that there's going to be an unfair trial. I don't agree with that premise. The premise that, they do it in the mafia. Like so that way, like this anonymous jury is definitely going to convict if they think that they're in danger of their lives. If they convict this guy, well, then they're more likely to convict this guy because they realize the danger and they're now anonymous. So I don't agree with the premise that having an anonymous jury somehow tips the scale against.
It's not about the anonymity of the jury. It's about where you pick the people for the jury from, whether or not they're anonymous.
Yeah, no, a separate point.
Whether or not they're anonymous.
Yeah, no, it's a separate point from what he was saying. I agree with him that we should select the jury from an area where it's less likely they know about the settlement and less likely that they're tuned into every aspect of what happened.
Well, also, it's less likely that they have something to lose should the riots happen. And so that's what he was saying about having it moved to somewhere other than Minneapolis, possibly to somewhere rural, because if the people who are in the jury are afraid that their neighborhood will be rioted upon, that will also play into it, not just whether or not they have information about the settlement.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm getting what you're saying, though, is like by providing them anonymity, I can't never say
it's a tough
one, that still should offer a certain barrier of protection against a fraudulent case or like that. Like, I know that me personally, like if I know that nobody's going to know it was me, you know what I mean? I could still walk in there objectively and say, all right, look, I'm just going to do my civic duty here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm still a fair dude. Like, I get what you're saying. Like, it's not impossible for him to catch a fair trial here. Now, like I said, I think that I'm just talking specifically about whether or not you move the case or not. I don't think that helps you. You know, that's my thing. Is like, I mean, only thing I can see is like maybe you're not offered the very particulates, the constant flow of information isn't necessarily hitting you as much. But the idea that you're going to find a jury that has no clue about this case, which is usually what you're looking for, like somebody who just doesn't know anything about it or whatever at all.
That's like impossible.
It's like impossible. So
you have to go up into the Appalachian.
So instead, I think that your next best bet is by offering these people the fact that, hey, look, nobody's ever going to know who you are. You're perfectly safe to make the right choice, not just one that you.
Yeah. You also go through the jury selection process where you ask these people, even though you know these certain facts. You know what I'm saying? Even though you know about this case, can you, with a clean conscience, like make a decision based only on the facts with this man presumed innocent until proven guilty? And when people take an oath and as a juror say, I can do that, we have to at some point take some people by their word.
Yeah. That's why they dismissed these two people, because after that settlement came out, two people came up and said, look, I can't be unbiased anymore.
One man literally, he was quoted as saying, that's a extremely high sticker price that shocked me. I might be messing that up, but basically he said that's a lot of goddamn money. And I don't know if I think that he could be presumed innocent based on the idea that the city that he was employed
dropped
by
$27
million on him, like he just hit the hottest album of the year.
Yeah,
it's with Michael. It's like Michael Jackson with the little kids. When you start paying settlements in the millions, multiple settlements in the millions, it's kind of hard for him to then have a trial where people presume he didn't do anything to these children.
Right.
So far, those that are chosen are a multi-race woman in her 20s, a multi-race woman in her 40s, 2 black men in their 30s, a black man in his 40s, a black woman in her 60s, 4 white women in their 50s, a white woman in her 40s, a white man in his 30s, and a white man in his 20s. So it seems pretty balanced. I mean,
it's a pretty, I mean, there's 7 white people, 6 people of color, 6 people that are not white,
and still 2 more.
Some of them,
I think actually 4 more, because I think they're gonna have 14.
You have to have 12 jurors and then 2 alternatives in case something happens to a few of them. You know, just some backups.
Yeah, but it's gonna be interesting as this unfolds.
And the defenses asked the judge to postpone the trial.
Yeah,
he's made motions to move the trial somewhere else. And like, I agree that it's. I think that the moving it to a rural area is more for the information side, which I think is not really going to help at all, except for maybe in these settlement particulates. But I think that moving it out of Minneapolis, personally, I think is a good idea, because the idea of if you decide to acquit, whether or not your specific family and your specific life is going to be in danger, the city that you live in could be in danger. And so that by proxy means that your lives are in danger. So like, that's the thing about having it in Minneapolis. Like, maybe you don't have it in Minneapolis, maybe you just move it to Chicago or something like that. But the jurors are people in that city, and that will be the city that takes the brunt of the attacks if it does turn to riots.
Yeah, no, I agree. That makes
and that'll play on your mind.
But
like,
they
when
also
you go in to determine whether or not he's guilty or not, like that's something you'll think about.
This is one thing I did see, though, that as a caveat point to it, I don't know if I'll be able to find it exactly in this article, but they were saying, like, it's not just as easy as like just skip on over.
Yeah,
here.
no,
like,
it's not.
It costs millions of dollars to like and it'll postpone the trial out for like a long time.
Yeah, they'll have to redo the entire jury selection.
Right, and all of that. And I think that this judge and everybody seems to be on a beeline to like, yo, we're gonna see this thing.
I thought that was one of my first thoughts when I
that's
heard
really
that
weird to
it
me,
was happening already. I was like, damn, that's fast.
Like they
got this shit popping.
That worries me because as much as I want to see justice served, I don't believe in railroading people.
Right.
And the fact that this occurred, last spring, the riots happened, and the protests which led to the rioting happened over the course of the summer. And now we're less than a year removed, and we're already seeing jury selection. Like that doesn't seem likely in a lot of other. What?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say like OJ and Rodney King. Like how quickly did they start? Yeah, exactly.
Took a long time.
A lot of we understand the judicial process to be a lengthy one and very exhaustive. Yeah. So I'm not so sure it should be railroaded and done so quickly.
What's the joke though?
The political winds have shifted.
People are like,
and they're blowing very hard.
They see that, hey, like you said, I'm not knocking it. Like I said, I like the result, but sometimes we also criticize how we get to that result. And I think that a lot of these politicians are looking for these political points. You know what I mean? Like they want to see this trial come to a swift end so they can say, look, see what we did, see what we did, see what we did.
And not only that, but we have to remember, like, it's not just like your governors and your senators and those are people that we think of as politicians, but like attorney generals are elected. They run campaigns. Defense attorneys and prosecutors are elected in a lot of states. And it's like, if your defense attorney comes up and he's like, I'm such a great an attorney, I've been doing this for 30 years, and every single person that you think has done heinous crimes is going to get off if you elect me.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely that defense attorney is going to get elected.
Yeah. This is why I actually don't believe, like you said, from the juror standpoint, I think you can get a fair, I think regular everyday people could give you a fair shot, but I do not see the system letting him walk away from this. I think that they're trying to do you keep pointing out the fact that it's not a judge trial, so they can't just tell the judge, hey, make sure you give him that sauce. But from what I see, dude, how about this? They talked about I would like to note that the city of Minneapolis indicated that the timing was of the essence, yet the agreement has not been finalized and will not be finalized for months. So, because even the judge said they thought it was odd that they would make this announcement about the settlement
before the jury selection,
like in the
middle of all of it,
in the middle of it.
And you could do the settlement and then not even announce it until after the trial.
Even finalize the settlement.
Hasn't even been signed yet.
Hey, we just want to let y'all know that we're going to give these guys $27 million. So I'm just saying.
It's like the director of the FBI coming out a month before the fucking election and be like, Hillary Clinton really fucked up, but I'm not going to put her in jail. But do with that information as you will.
Facts.
It was like, well, that played into many people's minds, I'm sure.
How many boomers did that scare into the Republican Party?
And that will play into the minds of the jury pool.
Yes. And so it seemed like a strategic move by the mayor office.
Thumb on the scale is what the fuck it looks like.
That's what it looks like to me, man.
Yeah, I won't say that it's impossible for him to get jammed up in this whole process. Yeah. I think that because it's a jury trial, there's a little bit of room for error and stuff like that,
sure.
but I'm sure that judge is getting lots of phone calls about whether or not they're going to be allowed to admit this 2019 arrest information, whether or not they're going to he's getting phone calls for sure.
And I want to also clarify too that as much as I get upset when the system puts their thumb on the scale, it's not about Derek Chauvin. It's not about the innocence of this officer. It's about the system railroading people.
Yeah,
that's where
the process.
Yes, that is where my qualm lies. It lies within this idea that the system can be like, well, he's obviously guilty, so just speed it up, get him in jail, get him on the get him on the electric chair.
The longer this man is in out in the public, the worse it's for me in our election. So let's go ahead and just wrap this up in a nice neat bow as quickly as possible.
That's the shit that gets me upset.
It gets me on every aspect of it, and that's always the shit that gets me. Like you said, it's not about this man. It's not about.
I think he's fucking guilty.
Hell yeah,
of second-degree manslaughter. I think that he's guilty as fuck.
Fucking guilty as hell. And
I would not. If they picked me, if I lived in Minneapolis, I'd be like, you don't want me in this motherfucking jury because I already think he's fucking guilty.
Sitting from right here, he guilty. I don't even need to see shit. Don't say shit.
Don't need any facts.
I'll walk
9
in
minutes.
Day one. guilty charge.
I'd like to remove myself from this trial, please.
They would call me up to the little jury stand. I would walk up, put my hands in my pockets, kneel on the ground, and be like, "This is what I think about Derek Chauvin."
Guilt, but so I mean, I just don't like how the system manipulates it all. You know, anything like the economy, this case. Like anytime they want to see a certain outcome come to be, and whoever these people are, the Bilderberg guys get together and they're all like, "This is what I think we should do." And they're like, "Yep,
Freemasons.
bet. All right, bet." And then they stamp that shit, and then they just, like you said, railroad the system in that direction, no matter what is actual or supposed to happen, whatever process they've outlined for us on pieces of paper that they said, hey, this is what your rights are as a citizen of the United States and stuff. They're like, until we say it's not.
Until we say that whatever you did is actually supposed to go to a FISA court, then none of that applies.
Then none of that fucking applies.
And you know what?
Until we Guantanamo your ass.
Yeah. You know, separate from the trial, or maybe not, depending on how you think about it, depending on where these jurors are coming from. But
they might be coming from this autonomous zone.
Yeah, there is an autonomous zone, another one in Minneapolis. It literally is right where he died. George Floyd Square is what it's called now.
Because they memorialized the square too, right?
Yes. So basically what happened was shortly after the death took place and everything kind of cleared out in that intersection, the community members came out and they blocked off the traffic because there were so many people, and like they built a huge memorial for them, or for George Floyd there, and you know, just they blocked it off. Like the community, from what I've read, it was the community members that did that. And then the city came in and they were like, all right, well, this isn't really like safe, so we're gonna put concrete barriers and stuff like that. And they've said once the trial's over, we'll reopen the intersection, but we'll let it stay as a memorial until this whole thing is complete. Well, shortly after they had set this whole thing up, and it's just like a one intersection thing that they had originally set up, activists moved in and declared it now, instead of the George Floyd Square, it's George Floyd Autonomous Zone. And, you know, I'm not saying that the activists are doing anything wrong here, but when you start setting up an environment where you're not allowing police in for whatever reason, that is going to attract criminals to that area, because they will be able to get away with things easier if they know that the police will not be allowed in there. It's
how do
tough.
you do this? I'm so confused with this whole idea of like you can just set up a zone where you just be like,
It's like a nonviolent protest, like a sit-in.
Yeah.
It's like it's a prolonged sit-in. It is a like when they did it with the Chaz. That was the first one.
Seattle,
right?
yeah.
The Chaz in Seattle. The way that they later then appropriated that is they were like, no, it's not the Chaz, it's the CHOP. It's an ongoing protest, not an autonomous zone. So it's really just about you name it one thing, but it's really something else because you act a certain way. So if you have people showing up every day, whether they're sleeping there or whether they're showing up, and they're protesting in that same spot that has been designated a protest spot, that's a CHOP, that's a Chaz, that's an autonomous zone, that's an ongoing protest.
And the thing is,
it's an amorphous.
Exactly, and that's the thing is that the police, and especially for the police, like it's, if you already look super terrible to everybody, you can't come in there and just start cracking dome pieces for people who claim to be protesters and clear them out of an area.
Especially when you block that area off from traffic.
So right, and so like they literally can't go in there with their squad cars or anything. Like if you were gonna, as police officers, if you're gonna go in there and clear it out, you have to go in on foot.
Or your bikes.
Or your bikes, your bicycles and shit like that. Like it's very difficult.
I want to see what this place looks like.
This area behind me is the George Floyd Memorial. This is where George Floyd was killed back in May. Take a look. These barricades have been set up by protesters and supporters of the movement. They don't allow anyone in, not even the police. It's called an autonomous zone. And
You're going to be in a bad situation here in a second.
oh, I thought if we were on this side of the barricade.
You're going to be in a bad situation in a second.
What do you mean by
Because
bad
you've been called out
situation?
for what you are, and you need to get out of here.
Please go.
Even on
We
this side of the
know
barricade.
what you are. You need to get in your car and go.
We're just media.
I don't give a who you are. You've been called out for who you are. You need to get in your car and go.
It's very tense near the memorial.
So
and a
that was the
militant
whitest
style
exchange
group
I've
has
ever seen in my entire life.
I just want to. Okay, so I did some digging. Like he was actually apparently the the gentleman that you see in the clip and the videographer, they were originally in the area. Now, like I said, it started out as just one intersection, the intersection where he died. But it has now expanded to about 6 blocks in that whole general area. And what happened was they went in to the area to film, and they were notified by 2 people. I don't know if it's the same 2 people, but they were notified by 2 people that they needed to leave or things would get, and he said, quote, bad. He was like, to use their words. And so they were originally in the zone filming, and then they were like, all right, maybe it's not worth it. Let's just get some footage of it from the outside of the zone. So they leave the zone, and then that's where the clip picks up that we just showed you, which is those people then come, some other 2 people maybe, or the same people, they come up to them at the edge of the zone. And I just want to, his word choice there was very strange. Like, the woman on the left was like, we're going to have to ask you guys to leave. And at the same time, the guy on the right is like, you're going to be in a bad situation unless you get out of here.
It was literally the manager of the supermarket and the security guard.
Yeah, exactly.
Coming up to you and saying, get those Tide Pods out of your pants, Mr. Shoplifter.
And the funny thing about it is that and this is just me being a little bit humorous, I guess, but he says, you're being called out for who you are.
Yeah.
We know who you are. You need to get out of here. And then he's like, we're just the media. And he was like, I don't give a fuck who you are. And I'm like, so do you know who these people are? Or do you not know who these people are? Like, what are you talking about, Bo?
When I think of intimidation, I don't think of 2 people with their hands in their pockets saying, hey, buddy, yeah, listen, get that riff-raff off of my block.
You're going to be in a bad situation.
Hey.
But then again, the man who was in the clip didn't seem very intimidating either. So, I mean, like, it was just all around on both sides, not a very intimidating
That was
bunch.
the most broccoli fight I've ever seen in my life. Tell that asparagus-looking motherfucker.
Some veggie tails looking.
Fuck.
That shit
Oh, my
was
goodness.
funny. That man had a gas mask on his hip. Where's your gun? Come with the gun at least. But I hear that there's a lot of gunfire and stuff be coming out from out there. And stuff
There's an article that I have in there. It is.
I was reading through that article that you posted.
Terribly
about, They were saying
sketchy. So this is an article in the Star Tribune, and it is jointly written by community members that live in and around that area. And so it's. I've only been able to corroborate a few of these reports with actual police reports.
Yeah.
But
because the police
aren't allowed in there. But it's hard to I just don't imagine what these people would gain from lying about these things.
Yeah.
Like, literally, it's a timeline. Like, we could just highlight March 6, 5:45. A 30-year-old volunteer is killed in the zone by gunshot. People in the zone are seen picking up shell casings and throwing them into city garbage, then loading the gunshot victim into the car to drive him to the hospital. 8:20 of the same day, neighbors call 911 again as multiple shots ring out with children listening. I mean, like, there's a case or there's a report in here from people that they're...
Damn, imagine this, dude. You're inside your garage.
You're in your garage, yeah, and all of a sudden your garage gets lit up. There's people on tops of businesses with like rifles on swiveling tripods overlooking the street. There was one case of these very sketchy looking people pushing this car with no license plates down the street, and then somebody comes out and says, you can't park that car here, you can't leave that car here. And they were like, okay, and then they just leave it, they just abandon it, they just walk away, and they left the car there anyways. And it's like, was that a bomb? Like, what the fuck's going on with you in those cars? Like, what's happening right now? And like, this is the kind of shit that happens when you say like, oh, we're not gonna let the police in here because the police are bad and they're killing people and it's stuff. And it's like, as soon as you do that, you create a situation for people who have nefarious intentions to come in, whether they support your cause or not, and do terrible acts. Yeah. Same thing with these giant protests. These giant protests provide a great cover for rioters and looters. And I'm not saying that they're the same people, but you create a really good situation for rioting and looting.
This is martial law. This is literally a martial law zone where it's like, hey, get your ARs, sit up on the roof with the tripod, and make sure nothing crazy happens. Like, who gave this person the right to become Batman of the fucking Minneapolis Autonomous
They
Zone?
say that the head of the, like, you know, shots ring out and hit people's houses and windows get broken into and stuff like that. And like the woman who's supposedly like running the zone or like heading up the zone is like visiting their houses and like letting them know like, hey, it's okay, they weren't trying to shoot at you. And then you
Who
can
are
literally
you trying to shoot at,
and,
though?
like you
That's
can
why-
literally see behind them people picking up. They say that they can, as this woman's telling them at their front door that they weren't trying to shoot at you, they can see other people picking up the shell casings from the fangs and disposing of them so that there's no evidence.
They talked about children watching the bullets hit the street and kick up dust.
Yeah.
And it's like
a war
that,
zone.
It sounds like Syria.
Yeah.
It sounds like Baghdad. That sounds like
100%.
fucking Solder City. And it's in the middle of Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And I'm still very confused as to how all of that's able to go down. You see what I'm saying? Like, now it's not just a peaceful protest, though. Like, there's gunshots.
Because
and
it's a PR thing. It's a PR thing. And unfortunately, like, the police are put in a seriously, like, negative situation, in my view, because, like I said, if not everybody knows that this is happening, and not everybody is, like, down with them coming in there, like some people agree that the whatever security detail of these people is better than the police being in there or something like that. And so as a PR thing, like as a PR thing, it looks really bad on the police if they come in here and forcefully break this thing up, because that will involve people who are peacefully protesting or whatever getting caught up in the mix.
30 shots?
Multiple cases of 30 shots. But that's what I'm saying, though, is that not everybody has the same information.
Sure.
Not everybody believes the same things about the information. And so just because you're saying, like, oh, well, there's 30 shots ringing out multiple times in a day, the police should come down there and break it up. But it's more of a tense situation than just like, you know, McCarthyism coming through, or like Nixon, like, get these motherfuckers off my lawn.
But that's what I'm saying. Like,
people live there. Businesses are supposed to operate there. Like, it just seems like you're destroying a community.
Dude,
oh yeah.
If one guy goes into a neighborhood and shoots 30 shots out, then the cops will come in and they'll investigate, right?
Yep.
So my thing is, I don't understand why the cops would feel like they don't have resources to investigate this zone, well document all the things that are going on there, come to the public with that information and say, this is the reason why we're going to go ahead and break this up. You know what I mean? Have the mayor of the damn city come out and say.
That's what happened in Seattle.
You know what I'm saying? Like, eventually you got to be able to be like, all right, look,
possibly,
like, we respect y'all's willingness to peacefully protest, and you know, we'll be standing here watching, and if you guys want to stay peaceful, then we'll let you do your thing. But as soon as we hear another 30 shots ring out towards kids, people's homes, like you said, businesses and establishments, these people are essentially being terrorized for something
and they
really
might
care
be
about.
getting leaned on, unfortunately. Like, this is another thing, is like, as police officers, they are kind of like the grunts at the like, they're the guys involved in doing the small time dirty day-to-day work and stuff like that. So like, and we've seen it from like investigation movies of like murder investigations, like your chief of police will tell you to drop a case even though you have tons of evidence, because he's being leaned on by politicians above him. And so like, it could be something like that where they're in fear of losing their jobs and their livelihoods for their own families if they decide to take action and do something about this.
Yeah. It's very, very sketchy.
And it's sketchy. And one of the things that's really interesting to me is that if you look into the details of this settlement, now I know it's not finalized or anything, or at least now I know. I didn't know that before. But apparently the city also donated $500,000 to, and I haven't been able to nail this down, whether it's some sort of organization that has something to do with this autonomous zone. I've heard reports that it's going to businesses in that area to like help out with the fact that they're not getting any business right now. But somehow $500,000 of that 27 mil is going to somebody in this autonomous zone. And it's like, what?
That happened in Seattle.
That's super sketch.
A Democratic an arm of the Democratic Party had paid a grant or a scholarship of some sort to the leader of Chaz for a studio that was in the boundaries within that Chaz zone, but he had but that was like previous to the Chaz operation. So like, it was an influx of money given essentially to this place under the guise of small business loan or something like that. That was being investigated a ton. I don't know all the legitimacy to those claims, but it's, I've seen those articles and those things talked about, linked to Black Lives Matter and linked to the autonomous zone in Seattle.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's very scary. Like, if even a quarter of anything that article said is true, then you can no longer allow those people to be in there, whether they're peacefully protesting or not, because there's all kinds of heinous shit going on.
Innocent civilians are going to die.
Yeah.
Businesses are going to go under in a
People's
time
community.
of economic crisis.
Like you said, that whole community, that whole 6-block area or whatever it is just being destroyed.
It's like, to me, it's like if they just turned the 9/11 memorial into like a fucking, you know what I mean, like homeless hangout or some shit.
Right.
Like this is supposed to be something that's supposed to memorialize this person who was, you know, victimized and stuff like that, and instead it's just turning into this like a
lawless fuckery zone.
Fuckery zone.
Yeah.
Exactly, fuckery. It's just
that
fuckery.
didn't happen with Occupy Wall Street.
I think, right?
Well, I mean, not to this extent, but there was a lot of heinous shit going on during Occupy Wall Street.
I mean, I'd be interested to know if there were any murders or shootings during the Occupy Wall Street.
I don't believe that there were any murders or shootings, but there was lots of accounts of rape and sexual harassment and assaults.
Yeah, well, anytime, I would say that you're living in tents with other people in close quarters like that.
And
there's
crime.
and
I mean, this is, and the Occupy Wall Street stuff, like, they were police present for that.
Yeah.
So it's like,
and that shit still happened.
Yeah.
So strange. You know, like you said, I think it's just an attraction. You know, there's certain people out there who are just anarchists. You know,
bad actors.
Just, who just don't.
QAnon shaman.
Yeah, you know what I mean. They're just out there and they want to fuck around. They just want to fuck. What was our little word from the dude who wrote the manifesto? The monkey wrench.
A little bit of monkey wrenching.
Yeah, Ted Kaczynski used to call it monkey wrenching.
Yeah, and some guys like to just go out there and fuck with the system and just, you know, flex their freedom, I guess, you know, and in ways that is just kind of dangerous, you know, because that's the thing that kills me. It seems like they were saying they're not letting people in though, so it's like, who are these people? Like, who is this group? This headline says militant style group. Of course, it's Fox News, so I don't, you know what I mean, Fox News love to throw some shit out there.
Yeah,
like
right underneath
militant.
that CNN. Why is George Floyd's memorial site surrounded by barricades?
Yeah, I know.
It's like, well, maybe it has something to do with that militant style group that Fox has been talking about.
I'm surprised they didn't stamp Antifa all over these fucking things too.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, that's the worst part about it,
militant
is that like, if this is supposed to be a memorial where people can come and pay their respects to this man.
Nope.
Like, who feels safe bringing their children to educate them about this?
You're not even allowed to.
Exactly. Like, they're
Those
not letting
stop
people
you
in
with guns.
It's like,
or the threat of.
Come on, children, go past the barbed wire barricades. We're going to go through the autonomous escape from Minneapolis zone.
And we know that at least one person has died. That volunteer got killed.
Yeah.
I don't know the specifics around why he died, but anytime you have somebody dying where you're supposed to have a memorial under some like shootings and stuff like that, it tells me that your memorial is it's escalating into something that it should not be.
Yep, and 100% is the truth right there.
Yeah.
Sketch, man. Sketch. I'm not visiting Minneapolis anytime
Nope.
soon. I'll tell you that.
Nope.
I just had a friend who was going back home. She's from Minneapolis, and her friends were like, "You gonna go to Minneapolis right now?" And isn't She's like, "Oh, it's not that bad," you know. But I'm like, it looks that way.
Well, it's a lot. There's always localized violence.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like during the height of the George Floyd protests, people were like, "Oh man, Charlotte, there's a lot of rioting, a lot of protests and shit going down in Charlotte." And I lived 30 miles away, and the most I saw was 2 protesters outside of a Target every day,
right,
holding very normal looking signs that were just like Black Lives Matter and, you know, say their names and things like that. And they were harassed by police every single day.
Damn.
I watched it go on for a couple of weeks on and off.
Wow.
And it would be like, I'd always be leaving work around dinner time, and that was the height of the foot traffic. So that's when they were always coming and protesting in front of that Target. And Target wasn't kicking them off the front, but the police were constantly being called. So there was this push and pull of like, we want to kick you off the property, but Target really doesn't want to take a stance on this, but you're impeding traffic and, you know, this and that. So it just I just knew I couldn't take a left to leave work. I had to go around and go the long way.
Yeah. It's tough.
Although one time when I did go by and the guy and me made eye contact, I was like,
yeah. Like,
I was like, I see you. I support you.
Do your thing, man.
Do your thing. Protest.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep driving.
I'm going to do it from in here, but I see
my white privilege is keeping me right behind the wheel of this Honda Civic, but I support you.
I see.
I really got to get home. I just finished a 12-hour shift, but hey, I see what you're doing.
Good self-roast right there. That was juicy. Takeaways? We should do major takeaways. Yeah. So, where y'all at with it after this? What's your takeaways from this?
I think no matter what this guy says, I'm going to think of this as a anti-Asian hate crime with regards to the Atlanta shooting. And in regards to Derek Chauvin and the murder of George Floyd, I think it was an intentional murder.
Yeah.
That's where I land at with these two things. I know both of those statements might be a bit controversial, but I think when everything is said and done, this man who committed this atrocity in Atlanta is going to be tried for specifically a hate crime, and I think that Derek Chauvin is going to be found guilty of, at a minimum, manslaughter.
Yeah.
Those are my takeaways.
I'm going to take a little bit different approach in the sense of, like, I think the thing that was a big takeaway for me in this conversation was nuance. You know what I mean? Like, understanding that, you know, all these things, like what kind of murder Derek Chauvin committed and stuff is you know what I mean? It comes down to very specific language in the law. It's not just like, it's murder, you know? And then, like, same thing we were talking about with the anti-Asian hate and the murders that happened in Atlanta and stuff. Like, you know, there's a lot of nuance that goes into it. Yes, there is a lot of anti-Asian hate and stuff going on, but that doesn't mean that that's tied to every single incident that you see anywhere, you know? And just, I would love to see us as a society be careful more of how we lump everything and everybody together and say, like, that's an Asian thing, or that's a black thing, or that's a whatever thing, you know, a Trump thing. You know, I think that's one of the biggest plagues ravaging our society.
Yeah, the divisive.
Yeah.
Personally, for me, I think the one of the biggest takeaways for me is definitely also kind of like that nuanced approach, but also more so in the sense of start looking at people as individuals who make individual decisions, and they have individual motives, and those sometimes tie into larger things at play. But until you know that for sure, keep an open mind about what's happening and what you see being reported, you know, and, like, don't just jump to the same conclusion that everybody's jumping to just because, and just because it appears that way, because shit's not always what it appears. Yeah. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And we have to give that space to allow for us to find the information to make a better decision, I think. And
more information is better.
Yeah, more information is better. Yeah. I always say that. Yeah. Even if some of it's false, even if I think that you should educate yourself, be able to not in what to think, but how to think, and how to interpret information. Because if you are confident in the fact of, like, being able to notice false information or false biases and stuff like that, that you can pull those out of the information and take that little tiny shred of truth that you may have not gotten from anywhere else. And so I definitely believe that more information is always better, especially if you're going to be making a decision.
Yeah, stop the hate.
Hey, yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, just
hate
stop
is
the hate.
Definitely a virus, man. Like, let's let that shit go in your speech and your actions and all that stuff. Try and move with love out here. But until next time, Internet, we appreciate your time, and we'll see you again soon. Peace.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something